After my son stopped by saying he needed to check my old car to make sure it was safe, I found a tracker hidden under the vehicle. Instead of asking him, I quietly took it off and mailed it to Canada. 12 hours later, I got a call, and it terrified me. Before I tell you what that voice on the phone said, and how I ended up sitting in a dark hotel room with a loaded service pistol on my lap, you need to understand the day my own flesh and blood decided to sell me out. My name is Elijah King. I am 73 years old. If you saw me walking down the gray streets of Chicago in my faded canvas jacket and work boots, you would not look twice. You would see just another retired black man trying to keep warm against the wind that cuts off Lake Michigan like a rusty knife. You would see an old man driving a dented 1998 Ford F-150 that sounds like it is gargling gravel every time I turn the key. And that is exactly what I want you to see. I spent 30 years in the logistics game, starting as a driver and ending up as a man who knew where every shipping container in the Midwest was buried. I learned one thing in the Marines and relearned it in the Union halls. The loudest man in the room is the first one to get hit. The quiet man is the one who survives. But my son Darius never learned that lesson. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Darius showed up at my bungalow. The sky was the color of a bruised plum and snow was threatening to fall. Darius does not visit on Tuesdays. Darius only visits when his gambling debts get too high or when his wife Tiffany sends him on an errand. I was in the garage organizing my tools. My garage is my sanctuary. Everything has a place. Every wrench is oiled. Every screw is sorted. When Darius walked in, I smelled him before I saw him. He smelled of expensive cologne trying to cover up the sour scent of fear. Sweat was beading on his forehead even though it was 30 degrees outside. "Hey, Pop," he said, his voice too loud, too cheerful. I didn't look up from the lawnmower blade I was sharpening. "Hello, Darius. To what do I owe the pleasure?" He paced around the garage, kicking at an imaginary spot of dirt. "I was just in the neighborhood. Tiffany and I were talking, and you know we worry about you driving that old truck. It is not safe, Pop. The suspension is shot. The brakes sound terrible." I stopped sharpening the blade. I looked at my truck. That truck is maintained better than most airplanes. I changed the brake pads myself 2 weeks ago. "It runs fine, Darius," I said calmly. "No, Pop, really." He insisted, moving closer to the vehicle. "I heard a weird rattling noise last time I was here. It has been bothering me. Let me just take a look underneath. You know, just for peace of mind." I looked at my son. He was 42 years old, but in that moment he looked like a child trying to hide a broken vase. His hands were shaking. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the truck with a hunger that made my stomach turn. Darius does not know a spark plug from a lug nut. He has never changed a tire in his life. Why would he want to crawl under my truck on a Tuesday afternoon in his designer jeans? "Go ahead," I said, keeping my voice flat, "if it makes you sleep better." I watched him. He grabbed a piece of cardboard and slid under the rear bumper. He was down there for a long time. Too long for a man who does not know what he is looking for. I heard the scuff of his jacket against the undercarriage. I heard a click, a soft metallic snap that would have been inaudible to anyone who hadn't spent years listening to the heartbeat of machines. When he slid out, he was covered in dust, but he was smiling. That smile did not reach his eyes. "It looks okay for now, Pop," he said, brushing off his knees. "But you really should think about getting a new car. Tiffany knows some great dealers. We could help you upgrade." I wiped my hands on a rag. "I will think about it." He left in a hurry. He did not ask for money, which was the first red flag. He did not stay for coffee, which was the second. He just jumped into his leased BMW and sped off like the devil was snapping at his heels. I waited until his taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I locked the garage door. I turned on the high-powered work lights. I did not need to guess what had just happened. My gut, which had kept me alive through the jungles of Vietnam and the Union Wars of the 90s, was screaming at me. I lay down on my mechanic's creeper and slid under the truck. I knew my vehicle. I knew every rust spot, every weld, every bolt. It took me less than 30 seconds to find it. Tucked high up inside the frame rail near the rear axle was a small black box. It was magnetic. It was about the size of a deck of cards. A tiny red light blinked once every 10 seconds. A GPS tracker, and not a cheap one you buy at the electronics store to find your lost keys. This was professional grade. Hardwired battery long-range signal real-time tracking. I lay there in the cold silence of my garage staring at that blinking red eye. My own son. My own flesh and blood had crawled under my truck to tag me like an animal. Why? That was the question. Why track an old man who only goes to the grocery store, the post office, and the community center? Unless they thought I was going somewhere else. Unless they thought I had something to hide. Or unless they were selling my location to someone else. The realization hit me cold and hard. Darius didn't put this here to keep me safe. He put this here because he is desperate. And desperate men do dangerous things. I did not get angry. Anger is a waste of energy. Anger makes you sloppy. Instead, I got cold. I reached up and pried the device loose. It came away with a heavy metallic clunk. I held it in my hand. If I destroyed it, the signal would die and they would know I found it. If I confronted Darius, he would lie, or worse, he would tip off whoever put him up to this. No. I needed to know who was holding the leash, and I needed to buy myself time. I walked over to my workbench. I found a lead-lined bag I used to store film rolls back in the day, but that would kill the signal. I did not want the signal dead. I wanted the signal to tell a lie. I wrapped the tracker in a padded envelope. I grabbed a roll of duct tape and a heavy cardboard box. I walked out the back door of my house, through the alley, and down 2 blocks to the shipping center. I kept the tracker in my pocket, moving with me so the signal would look natural. I walked up to the counter. The clerk was a young man, bored and chewing gum. "I need this shipped overnight priority express," I said, placing the box on the scale. "Where to?" he asked. I looked at the map on the wall. I needed it to go far. I needed it to cross a border where jurisdictions get messy and tracking signals get flagged by different authorities. "Montreal, Canada," I said. I gave him the address of an old warehouse that had been demolished 10 years ago. It didn't matter if it arrived. It only mattered that it moved, and that it moved fast. I paid cash. I walked out. When I got back to my house, I did not turn on the lights. I sat in my armchair in the living room watching the street through the blinds. My truck sat in the driveway, a decoy. To anyone watching on a screen, I was still here. But soon that little red dot would start moving. It would go to the airport distribution center, then it would fly. It would travel hundreds of miles north. I checked my watch. It was 6 p.m. My phone rang. It was Darius. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Tiffany this time. I let it ring. They were watching the dot. They probably saw it moving toward the airport and were confused. Why was the old man going to the airport? Why was he moving so fast? I sat there in the dark as the hours ticked by. 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. By midnight, the tracker would be on a cargo plane. At 2 a.m., my phone rang again. But this time, the name on the screen was not Darius. It was not Tiffany. It was unknown number. I stared at the glowing screen. A feeling of dread settled in my stomach. This was it. This was the other shoe dropping. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear. I did not say a word. I just listened. The breathing on the other end was heavy, wet, like someone with a deviated septum or a bad habit. "I see you are moving, North, old man," a voice rasped. It was a voice I did not recognize. Low, gritty, and devoid of any humanity. "You think you can run with the package?" the voice continued. "You think you can cross the border and we won't touch you?" I stayed silent. My grip on the phone tightened. "Darius said you were stupid." The voice laughed, a dry, cracking sound. "He said you were just a senile old fool sitting on a gold mine." "But you are trying to run. That is a mistake." The voice dropped an octave colder than the Chicago wind. "If that truck crosses the Canadian border with what belongs to us inside, we will not just kill you, Elijah. We will peel you apart. We will start with your son, then his wife, and we will save you for last. Turn around. Bring the package to the designated drop point. You have 1 hour." The line went dead. I sat there in the silence of my living room, the dial tone humming in my ear. My hands were not shaking. My heart was beating slow and steady, a war drum calling me back to battle. They thought I had a package. They thought I was running. And Darius. My son had told them I was sitting on a gold mine. He hadn't just tracked me. He had sold me. He had leveraged my life for his debts. I stood up. My knees popped, but my legs were strong. I walked to the hall closet. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down a shoebox that hadn't been opened in 15 years. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, was my Colt 1911. I checked the magazine. Full. I wasn't a retired logistics manager anymore. I wasn't a father anymore. I was a man whose perimeter had been breached. I looked at the picture of my late wife on the mantel. "I am sorry, Mary," I whispered. I tried to keep him safe. I tried to be gentle, but you cannot hug a snake without getting bit. I put the gun in my waistband. I grabbed my go bag, which was always packed with cash and passports. I slipped out the back door, leaving the empty house behind. The tracker was halfway to Canada. The bad men were looking north. And I was going hunting. 12 hours is a long time to sit in the dark when you are waiting for the world to end. I sat in my wingback chair in the corner of the living room, the blinds drawn tight against the Chicago night. The only light came from the street lamps filtering through the slats, casting long prison bar shadows across the floorboards. My house, which usually smelled of lemon polish and old paper, now smelled of gun oil and cold sweat. My phone sat on the small table next to me, vibrating against the wood like a trapped insect. It was Darius. Again. He had called 14 times in the last hour. I watched his name flash on the screen, glowing in the darkness, and then fade to black. I did not touch it. I did not decline the call. I just let it ring until it gave up. I knew why he was calling. He was watching a screen somewhere, probably huddled in his bathroom or sitting in his car, and he was seeing a little digital dot moving north. He was seeing his father, or what he thought was his father, moving toward the Canadian border at 60 miles an hour. And he was terrified. Not for me. If he was scared for me, he would have come to the house. He would have knocked on the door. He would have confessed. No, Darius was scared for himself. He was scared because the plan, whatever twisted scheme he and Tiffany had cooked up, was going off the rails. He had put a leash on a dog, and the dog had slipped the collar and was running for the woods. I closed my eyes and breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. The old rhythm, the calm before the breach. In my mind, I traced the route of the package. By now, the overnight courier truck was likely passing through Michigan, heading for the bridge. The tracker inside that box was pinging a satellite, and that satellite was sending a signal to a server, and that server was feeding a map on someone's phone. Darius was watching that map, but he wasn't the only one. At 2:13 a.m., the phone lit up again. But this time the screen did not say Darius. It did not say Tiffany. It showed a string of numbers that meant nothing to a civilian, but meant everything to a man who had spent his life navigating the gray zones of logistics and labor unions. A burner number. Untraceable, disposable. This was it, the other shoe. I picked up the phone. My hand was steady. My pulse was slow. I pressed the accept button and brought the device to my ear, but I did not speak. The first rule of engagement is never give away your position. Let the enemy fire first. For 10 seconds, there was only the sound of static and heavy breathing on the other end. It sounded wet and raspy, like a man who had smoked too many cigarettes in too many cold alleyways. "You are driving fast, old man," the voice said. It was not Darius. It was a voice devoid of warmth, devoid of humanity. It was the voice of a man who looked at violence the way a carpenter looks at a hammer. Just a tool to get the job done. I remained silent. I looked at the empty fireplace. "I see you," the voice continued, a low growl that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You are heading for the bridge. You think you are clever. You think you can take the asset across the line and we cannot touch you." The asset. The word hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. They weren't just tracking me. They weren't just curious about where an old man went on a Tuesday. They were tracking an asset. My mind raced back to the conversation in the garage. Darius sweating. Darius lying. Darius checking the undercarriage. He hadn't been checking for safety. He had been verifying the package. He had told someone that my truck, my beat-up rusted 1998 Ford, was carrying something valuable. Or worse, he had told them that I was the value. "You are making a mistake, Elijah," the voice said, using my name with a familiarity that felt like a violation. Darius said you were stubborn. He said you were a senile old fool who sat on his porch and guarded his pennies. But he didn't say you were a runner. So Darius had talked. He had given them my name. He had painted a picture of me, a senile old fool. That is what my son thought of me. That is what he had sold to these wolves. He had traded his father's life for what? A gambling debt, a business loan for Tiffany. It didn't matter, the price was the same. "Turn around," the voice commanded, dropping all pretense of mockery. "If that truck crosses the Canadian border with our property inside, we will not just kill you, we will make it last. We will start with your fingers and end with your eyes. And after we are done with you, we will pay a visit to your son and his pretty wife. Property." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with a sickening clarity. Darius hadn't just put a tracker on my car. He had told these men, loan sharks, cartel enforcement, whoever they were, that I was holding something for him. Or maybe he had told them that I had a secret stash, a hidden fortune, the gold mine the voice had mentioned earlier. My son had leveraged me. He had used me as collateral. He had told them I was holding the money or the goods to pay off his debts, and then he had tagged me so they could come and collect. And now because I had mailed the tracker north, they thought I was stealing their payment. They thought I was running away with their money. I finally spoke. My voice was gravel and iron. "Who is this?" The man laughed, a dry cracking sound. "It does not matter who I am, Elijah. It matters what I can do. You have 1 hour to turn that truck around. Bring the package to the rail yard in Gary, or we burn everything you love." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and stared at the dark screen. The silence of the house rushed back in, but now it felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with threat. They thought I was in the truck. They thought I was driving to Canada. That meant for the moment they were looking north. They were watching a digital ghost moving along the highway at 65 miles an hour. But that illusion would not last. Eventually the truck would stop. Eventually they would realize the driver wasn't turning around. Or worse, the courier would reach the border and the signal would cross into a new jurisdiction and they would realize they had been played. And when they realized the truck was a decoy, they would look back. They would look here, to the source. They would come to this house. I stood up. My joints popped a symphony of old injuries and age, but I ignored the pain. I moved to the window and peered through the blinds. The street was empty. Snow was starting to fall, dusting the pavement with white powder. It looked peaceful. It was a lie. I could not stay here. If I stayed here, I was a sitting duck. A man in a box waiting for the lid to be nailed shut. I walked to the kitchen. I did not turn on the light. I knew the layout by heart. I opened the drawer next to the fridge and took out a roll of heavy-duty trash bags. I walked to the bedroom and pulled the pillowcase off my pillow. I went to the wall safe hidden behind the painting of the Mississippi River. I spun the dial. Left, right, left. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside was not a fortune. Darius was wrong about that. There was no stack of gold bars. There was just the paperwork of a life lived carefully. Deeds, titles, and a stack of cash wrapped in rubber bands. Emergency fund, run money. I took the cash. I took the passport I had renewed last year just in case. I put them in the pillowcase. Then I went to the hall closet. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down the shoebox. I opened it, and the smell of oil and steel filled my nose. My Colt 1911. The service pistol I had carried in circumstances far worse than this. I checked the magazine. 7 rounds of .45 ACP. 1 in the chamber makes 8. I racked the slide. The sound was loud in the quiet house, a mechanical promise of violence. I tucked the gun into the back of my waistband. The cold steel against my spine was a comfort. It reminded me of who I used to be, who I still was beneath the gray hair and the retirement checks. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a confused old man being put in a home. I was a Marine. I was a survivor. I grabbed my heavy coat and my boots. I did not look back at the photos on the mantle. The photos of Darius graduating high school. The photos of his wedding to Tiffany, where she looked at him like he was a credit card and he looked at her like she was a prize. I couldn't look at them. If I looked at them, I might hesitate. And hesitation gets you killed. I slipped out the back door into the biting cold of the alley. The wind hit me, but I didn't shiver. I locked the door behind me. My truck was gone, or at least the tracker was gone. But I had a backup. I always had a backup. 3 houses down, my neighbor Mrs. Higgins had an old Buick sedan sitting under a tarp in her carport. She had lost her license 2 years ago and asked me to start it up once a week to keep the battery alive. I had the spare key in my pocket. I walked through the shadows, sticking to the fence line, moving with a silence that belied my size. I reached the Buick. I pulled back the tarp. The car was dusty but solid. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather was freezing. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. I didn't turn on the headlights. I let the car idle for a moment, watching my breath mist in the air. Darius had sold me out. He had put a target on my back to save his own skin. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just an old man who would roll over and die. He was about to learn that he was wrong. I shifted the car into gear and rolled slowly down the alley, the gravel crunching softly under the tires. I wasn't running away. I was repositioning. I was changing the battlefield. They wanted a package. They wanted an asset. Well, I was coming for them, and I was bringing hell with me. It was 2 a.m. when the devil finally pulled into my driveway. I was crouched in the dark corner of my detached garage, peering through a gap in the weathered wood slats where a knot had fallen out years ago. The air inside smelled of gasoline and old sawdust, and the cold was seeping up through the concrete floor into my boots. But I did not move a muscle. I stayed as still as a statue, watching the scene unfold through that tiny hole like a sniper waiting for a target. Headlights swept across the front of my house, cutting through the falling snow and illuminating the dead grass on the lawn. It was Darius's leased BMW. He drove it like a man possessed, jumping the curb and screeching to a halt just inches from the front porch. The engine didn't even have time to die before the doors flew open. Darius scrambled out of the driver's side. He looked worse than he had earlier. His coat was unbuttoned, flapping in the wind, and his face was pale, a ghostly mask of terror in the wash of the security lights. But it was the passenger who drew my attention. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She stepped out of the car with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. She was wearing a white wool coat that probably cost more than my truck, and her heels clicked sharply on the frozen pavement. She didn't look scared. She looked furious. She looked like a woman who had bet the house on black and the ball had landed on red. They ran up the steps to my front door. Darius started pounding on the wood with both fists. "Open up, Pop," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I know you are in there. Open the damn door." I watched from the garage, silent and invisible. The house was dark. To them, it must have looked like a tomb. "He is not answering," Tiffany hissed. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and jabbed at the screen, her face illuminated by the blue glow. "The dot is moving, Darius. Moving. Look at this." She shoved the phone in his face. Even from 20 yards away, I could see the frantic energy in her movements. "He is doing 90 miles an hour," she shouted, her voice shrill, cutting through the winter wind. "He is passing through Milwaukee. He is running Darius." He figured it out. Darius looked at the phone and then back at the door. He looked like he was about to vomit. "No," he stammered. "Pop wouldn't run. He doesn't know. He thinks he is just driving. Maybe he's just going to visit someone." "Visit someone?" Tiffany laughed, a cruel barking sound that had no humor in it. "Who does he know in Canada, Darius? He is making a run for the border. He is taking the car. He is taking the package." I listened, my grip tightening on the handle of the .45 tucked into my waistband. They were watching the tracker I had mailed. They were watching a FedEx plane or a long-haul truck speeding north, and they thought it was me. They thought I was fleeing the country. Darius turned back to the door and kicked it. "Come out, old man," he yelled. "Don't do this to me." He was unraveling. I had seen men break like this before under mortar fire or when the Union strikes turned violent. It is an ugly thing to watch a man lose his spine. He slumped against the door frame, burying his face in his hands. "It is over, Tiff," he moaned. "We lost him. He is going to cross the border, and we are going to be left holding the bag." That was the moment the dynamic shifted. That was the moment I saw the true face of the enemy. Tiffany didn't comfort him. She didn't put a hand on his shoulder. Instead, she grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive jacket and spun him around. The sound of the slap echoed across the yard, sharp and loud like a pistol shot. Darius stumbled back, holding his cheek, staring at her in shock. "Shut up, you idiot," she screamed. "Stop crying and think." She stepped into his personal space, pushing him back until he was pinned against the railing. Her face was inches from his, twisted into a snarl of pure venom. "He is running with the money, Darius. Do you understand that? He is running with the retirement fund, the offshore accounts, all of it." I froze in the garage. The air suddenly felt very thin. The retirement fund. They didn't just think I was a senile old man with a rusty truck. They knew. Somehow they knew. I had spent 40 years building a nest egg, not just a pension but investments. Real estate holdings in developing neighborhoods bought when the city was burning and sold when the city was booming. Stocks bought in the 80s and never touched. I had millions tucked away in accounts that didn't have my name on the mailbox. I lived like a pauper because I wanted to, because wealth paints a target on your back. But somewhere along the line, I had slipped. Maybe a bank statement left unshredded. Maybe a phone call overheard. Darius and Tiffany knew I was sitting on a fortune, and they had sold that information.
If he crosses that border,
Tiffany hissed, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper that carried on the wind. The cartel will kill us all. Do you hear me? They don't care about your excuses. They want the collateral. They want the old man and his money. The cartel. The word hung in the air, heavy and radioactive. This wasn't just about gambling debts to a local bookie. This wasn't about a bad business loan. My son had gotten in bed with monsters. He had promised them my wealth as collateral for his mistakes. He had probably told them I would sign it over. Or maybe he had promised them that once I was gone, he would inherit it all and pay them back with interest. But I wasn't dying, and now I wasn't sitting still. We have to get inside. Tiffany commanded, pushing Darius toward the door. We need to find the documents. We need the account numbers. If he is running, he couldn't take everything. He must have left a paper trail. But he is not here. Darius whined. I don't care, she snapped. Break the window. Kick the door down. I don't care if you have to burn the house down. Darius, we are getting inside. We need something to give them. If we show up empty-handed, we are dead by morning. Darius looked at the door, then at his wife. He looked at the woman who had just slapped him, the woman who had led him to the edge of the abyss and was now preparing to push him in, and he obeyed. He stepped back, raised his leg, and kicked the lock plate with everything he had. The wood splintered with a loud crack. He kicked it again. The door swung inward, crashing against the wall. They rushed inside the darkness of my home, swallowing them whole. I watched them go. I felt a strange detachment, a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. That was the house where I had raised him. That was the house where I had held him when he had bad dreams. That was the house where his mother had died in her sleep. And now he was tearing it apart like a thief looking for salvation in the ruins of my life. I could not stay. They would tear through the house room by room. They would find the wall safe empty. They would find the closet empty. And eventually they would look outside. They would see the garage. I moved. I stayed low, keeping below the window line of the garage. I slipped out the side door, moving like a shadow against the dark siding of the neighbor's fence. The snow was falling harder now, covering my tracks as fast as I made them. I reached the neighbor's carport 3 houses down. Mrs. Higgins's old Buick was waiting under the tarp, a sleeping beast of steel and chrome. I peeled back the cover, my movements efficient and silent. I opened the door and slid onto the freezing leather seat. I could hear the sounds of destruction coming from my house down the alley, the crash of overturning furniture, the sound of glass breaking. They were destroying my life, looking for a golden ticket that wasn't there. I put the key in the ignition. I paused for a second, looking back toward my home. I am sorry, Darius, I whispered. You made your choice. You chose the wolf over the shepherd. I turned the key. The Buick roared to life, a low rumble that was lost in the wind. I didn't turn on the lights. I kept my foot off the brake so the taillights wouldn't flare. I let the car roll down the alley gravel, crunching softly under the tires. I was a ghost now, a dead man driving a dead woman's car. Darius and Tiffany were in my house hunting for a fortune. The men they worked for were watching a dot move toward Canada, and I was slipping into the night, vanishing into the city grid. I had the cash, I had the gun, and I had the truth. They wanted a war. They wanted to drag an old man out of his cave and steal his bones. Fine. I shifted the Buick into drive and merged onto the side street. If it is a war they want. I thought, gripping the steering wheel, it is a war they will get. But they forgot one thing. The hunter does not make noise until the trap is already sprung. I drove Mrs. Higgins's Buick into the industrial graveyard of the south side, where the streetlights were shot out and the shadows stretched long and thin like starving dogs. This was Iron Mike's territory. Mike ran a scrapyard that officially did not exist on any city map. It was a place where cars went to die and where men like me went when we needed to disappear. I pulled the car between 2 stacks of crushed sedans that loomed like rusted monoliths in the snow. Mike was waiting for me by the hydraulic crusher. He was a giant of a man, his skin the color of crude oil, his beard gray and tangled. He held a lit cigar that glowed like a single angry eye in the dark. He didn't ask why I was there at 3 in the morning. He didn't ask why I was driving a car that smelled like lavender perfume and old lady mints. In our line of work, questions were dangerous. Answers were expensive. I need a ghost. Mike, I said, stepping out of the Buick. Mike looked at the car, then at me. He nodded once. He pointed to a gray 2005 Chevy Impala sitting near the back fence. It was the kind of car that was invisible. The kind of car you could park next to a police station or a crack house and nobody would look twice. "It runs," he grunted. "Plates are clean enough." I handed him a roll of cash. I didn't count it. He didn't count it. I moved my go bag from the Buick to the Impala. But before I left, I needed to set the stage. I needed to create a narrative for anyone who came looking. I took the map from my glove box and opened it on the passenger seat of the Buick. I took a red marker and circled a town in Florida, Tallahassee. I left a half-eaten sandwich and a receipt for gas on the dashboard. It was a simple trick, a rookie trick. But sometimes the simple tricks work best because people see what they want to see. If Darius or the police found this car, they would think I had panicked. They would think I was running south to retire in the sun. They would split their resources. They would look north because of the tracker, and they would look south because of the car. And while they were looking in two directions, I would be right here in the middle watching them burn. I shook Mike's hand. He held on for a second longer than necessary. "Trouble, Elijah?" he asked, his voice low. "Family trouble," I said. Mike nodded and let go. "The worst kind," he said. I drove the Impala out of the yard and merged back into the city traffic. I was a ghost now. I had no name. I had no address. I was just another set of headlights in the Chicago night. While I was vanishing, my daughter-in-law was trying to set the world on fire. I wasn't there, but I knew Tiffany. I knew how her mind worked. She was a woman who believed that rules were for other people. She believed that if you screamed loud enough and cried hard enough, the world would bend to your will. She dragged Darius to the 4th Precinct station. I can imagine the scene. Darius pale and shaking, looking like he was about to throw up. Tiffany immaculate in her white coat, her makeup perfectly applied to look distressed but still beautiful. She marched up to the front desk and demanded to see the captain. She didn't get the captain. She got Sergeant Miller. I have known Miller for 20 years. We served on the neighborhood watch together back when the gangs were trying to take over the block. He is a good man, a cynical man, a man who knows that when a beautiful woman walks into a police station at 3 a.m. crying about a missing person, there is usually money involved. "My father-in-law has been abducted," Tiffany sobbed, clinging to Miller's desk. "Or he has wandered off. He has dementia. He is confused. He took his truck and he is driving north. You have to stop him." Miller looked at her. He looked at Darius, who was staring at his shoes. "Elijah King has dementia?" Miller asked, his voice flat. "Yes," Tiffany insisted, tears streaming down her face. "He has been getting worse. He forgets who we are. He forgets where he lives. We think someone might have tricked him, or maybe he is having an episode. You have to put out a silver alert. You have to stop that truck before it crosses the border." Miller leaned back in his chair. He tapped his pen on the desk. He had seen me at the diner 3 days ago. We had talked about the Cubs and the price of lumber. I had been sharp. I had been Elijah. "This doesn't sound right," Miller said slowly. "Elijah is a careful man. If he is driving north, he has a reason." "He is sick," Tiffany screamed, slamming her hand on the desk. "He is a danger to himself. He is carrying valuable family heirlooms. He doesn't know what he is doing. If you don't stop him and something happens to him, I will sue this department for negligence. I will have your badge." That was her mistake. You do not threaten a man like Miller. You do not try to bully a cop who has been on the force since the riots. Miller stood up. He was not a tall man, but in that moment he loomed over her. "We will put out a bolo for the vehicle, ma'am," he said, his voice cold. "We will notify the highway patrol, but a silver alert requires a doctor's diagnosis. Do you have one?" Tiffany froze. She didn't. That was the paperwork she had been trying to forge. That was the paperwork she had paid Paul Hayes to create. We were in the process of getting it," she stammered. "But this is an emergency. He is heading for Canada. Why does it matter if he goes to Canada?" Miller asked, his eyes narrowing. "It is a free country. A man can take a trip. Because he has our money," Darius blurted out. The silence in the precinct was sudden and absolute. Tiffany spun around and glared at her husband, eyes wide with fury. Darius clapped a hand over his mouth, realizing too late that he had said the quiet part out loud. Miller looked from Darius to Tiffany. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, a smile that said he knew exactly what he was looking at. "So this isn't about his safety," Miller said. "This is about money." It is his retirement fund, Tiffany said quickly, trying to recover. He withdrew it. He is confused. He is going to lose it all. We are just trying to protect him. Miller picked up the phone. I will alert the Border Patrol, he said, but I am not issuing an Amber Alert for a man taking a vacation with his own money. Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual crimes to solve. Tiffany stormed out of the station, dragging Darius behind her. She had failed to weaponize the police. She had failed to stop the truck. And the clock was ticking. I was sitting in the Impala, parked in the shadow of a billboard near the highway on-ramp, when the notification came through on the cloned version of Darius's phone I had set up weeks ago. It wasn't a text from me. It was a notification from the tracking app. The dot had stopped moving. I checked the time. It was 4:15 a.m. The package had arrived at the bridge. The Ambassador Bridge connecting Detroit to Windsor. The busiest border crossing in North America. I closed my eyes and pictured it. The courier truck idling in the line. The customs agent asking for the manifest. The scanner reading the plates. And then the notification changed. Signal lost. The truck had crossed. It was in Canada. The jurisdiction had shifted. The tracker was now roaming on a foreign network. My phone buzzed. It was the unknown number again. The cartel. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I knew what they were seeing. They were seeing their collateral, their gold mine leaving their reach. They were seeing $1 million in potential leverage disappear into the Great White North. They wouldn't call me to negotiate anymore. The time for negotiation was over. Now was the time for punishment. I looked down at the cloned phone in my lap. A new message popped up on Darius's screen. It was from a number listed only as loan consultant. The message was short. It was brutal. It was the end of my son's life as he knew it. You broke the deal. The asset is gone. You have 24 hours to produce the collateral, or we take the payment in flesh. Prepare your coffin. I stared at the words. I felt a pang of sorrow deep in my chest. A father should never have to watch his son be hunted. A father should never have to see his child face the consequences of a deal with the devil. But Darius had signed the contract. He had forged the signature. He had tried to sell his father to save himself. I put the car in gear. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the city in white. It covered the dirt. It covered the trash. But it couldn't cover the sins of my family. Darius was going to receive that text in a few seconds. He was going to read it while sitting in his car next to his wife who despised him. He was going to realize that the police couldn't help him and his father wasn't coming back. He was alone. And I was watching. I pulled the Impala onto the highway, heading away from the border, away from the house, away from the life I used to know. I had bought myself some time. The cartel would be busy hunting Darius. Darius would be busy panicking. That gave me a window, a small window to strike back. I wasn't going to Canada. I wasn't going to Florida. I was going to the source. I touched the pocket where I kept my old union book. Inside was a list of names. Men who owed me favors. Men who knew how to make problems disappear. It was time to make a call. Not to the police, not to a lawyer. To the fixer. The game had changed. They wanted a victim. They were going to get a war. The parking garage of the Sovereign Heights apartment complex is a place designed to make you forget the world outside exists. It is clean and white and smells of lemon cleanser and money. The concrete is polished so smooth it reflects the overhead LEDs like a mirror. It is a fortress of wealth, a place where people like my daughter-in-law Tiffany believe nothing bad can ever touch them. They think a key fob and a gate guard can keep out the consequences of their actions. I was sitting 3 miles away in the cramped back room of an internet cafe that smelled of stale coffee and ozone, watching my son's life fall apart on a 15-inch monitor. I had installed the cameras 2 months ago. It was a Sunday when they had invited me over for a barbecue. I told them I needed to use the restroom, and instead I spent 20 minutes planting pinhole cameras in the living room, the kitchen, and the garage. I told myself back then that I was just being a paranoid old man. I told myself I was crazy for spying on my own family. But looking at the screen now, I knew that paranoia was just experience whispering in my ear. On the screen, Darius was pacing back and forth next to his BMW. He was still wearing the same clothes from the night before, but now they were rumpled and stained with sweat. He looked like a man walking the plank. He kept checking his phone, his eyes darting to the shadows between the concrete pillars. He was waiting for the police. He was waiting for me. He was waiting for a miracle. But miracles do not come to men who sell their fathers. The black van that pulled up the ramp did not look out of place. It was a Mercedes Sprinter, clean and professional, the kind used by caterers or florists. It rolled silently toward Darius. He didn't even look up until the sliding door flew open. The violence was fast and ugly. It wasn't like the movies. There was no kung fu, no witty banter. Two men in ski masks jumped out. Darius tried to run, but he tripped over his own expensive Italian loafers. He scrambled backward on the polished concrete, his mouth opening in a scream that the audio feed picked up as a distorted crackle. One of the men kicked him in the ribs. I watched my son curl into a ball, protecting his head. I watched him beg. I watched him offer them money he didn't have. They grabbed him by the arms and dragged him toward the van. He was dead weight, kicking and crying. "Wait," Darius screamed. "My wife, she has the money. Ask her. She has the codes." I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering a painful rhythm against my ribs. He was still trying to use someone else to save himself. Even as they threw him into the back of the van, he was trying to trade Tiffany for his freedom, just like he had tried to trade me. The van door slammed shut. Tires squealed. The vehicle sped down the ramp and disappeared into the Chicago morning, leaving nothing behind but a scuff mark on the floor and a single shoe. And then the elevator doors opened. Tiffany walked out. She was wearing her workout clothes, yoga pants, and a designer hoodie, holding a green smoothie. She walked toward the spot where the BMW was parked. She saw the shoe. She saw the scuff mark. She stopped. She looked around the empty garage. She didn't call out for Darius. She didn't run to the security guard booth. She walked over to the BMW and looked inside. It was empty. She looked at the tire tracks. She took a sip of her smoothie. Then she pulled out her phone. I switched the audio feed to the camera hidden in the garage rafters. The sound was crisp. "Hello," she said. Her voice was calm. Ice water calm. "Is this Mr. Henderson?" "Yes, this is Tiffany King. I need to schedule an emergency meeting regarding the estate planning we discussed." I watched in disbelief. Her husband had just been snatched by the cartel. He was likely being beaten in the back of a van at this very moment, and she was calling a probate lawyer. "Yes," she continued, walking slowly toward the elevator, pressing the button with a manicured nail. "The situation has become complicated. My father-in-law, Elijah King, has gone missing. We believe he may have had a mental break and wandered off. Or perhaps something worse. Yes, he is 73. And my husband Darius, well, Darius seems to have gone looking for him and has not returned." The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, her face reflected in the polished steel doors. "If both of them are declared missing or incompetent," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the small space, "what is the timeline for the transfer of assets? As the wife, I would have power of attorney over Darius's estate, correct? And if Darius inherits Elijah's estate by default, then I would control that too." Yes, I understand. Draw up the papers." "I want to file for emergency conservatorship over both of them by noon." The doors closed and the screen went black. I sat back in my chair, the breath leaving my lungs in a long, shuddering sigh. I had seen evil in my life. I had seen men do terrible things for survival. I had seen greed twist good people into monsters. But this was something else. This was a cold reptilian calculation that made my blood run cold. Tiffany didn't care if Darius lived or died. In fact, she probably preferred him dead. If Darius was alive, he was a liability. He was a gambler with debts. But if he was missing, a victim of a tragic kidnapping alongside his senile father, he was a golden ticket. She could play the grieving wife. She could take control of the assets she thought I had. She could sell the house, liquidate the accounts, and disappear before anyone realized there was no money to be found. She was counting on the cartel doing her dirty work. She was counting on them killing us both. My hand hovered over the phone. I could call the police. I could tell them everything. I could send them the video of the kidnapping. They would find the van. They might save Darius. But I pulled my hand back. If I saved Darius now, he would learn nothing. He would go back to her. She would spin a story. She would cry. She would say she was in shock, and he would believe her because he was weak and he was afraid. He would be safe, but he would still be a slave. And Tiffany would walk away. She hadn't committed a crime yet. Being a cold-hearted snake isn't illegal. Calling a lawyer isn't illegal. No, I needed more. I needed her to hang herself. And I needed Darius to see the rope. He needed to sit in that dark room with those men. He needed to wonder why no one was coming for him. He needed to realize that the woman he had sold his father for was currently measuring the drapes for his funeral. I wasn't going to let him die. I knew the cartel. They wouldn't kill him yet. They wanted money. Dead men don't pay. They would hold him. They would hurt him. They would make him call me. And when he called, I needed to be ready. Not with a ransom, but with a reckoning. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked out of the internet cafe into the blinding white light of the winter day. The city was waking up. People were rushing to work, oblivious to the wolves walking among them. I needed help. I had the will, and I had the anger, but I did not have the reach. I was one old man against a criminal organization and a sociopath with a law degree. I needed someone who knew how to navigate the sewers without getting dirty. I walked 3 blocks to a payphone outside a liquor store. I didn't use my burner. I didn't use Darius's cloned phone. I used a quarter. I dialed a number I had memorized 30 years ago, a number that hadn't changed since the days when the unions ran this city. The phone rang 4 times. Law offices, a voice answered. Smooth-cultured and dangerous. I need to speak to Silas, I said. Mr. Silas is in court, the voice said dismissively. May I ask who is calling? Tell him it is the man who pulled him out of the burning warehouse in '98, I said. Tell him Elijah King is calling in his marker. There was a pause. A long silence where I could hear the hum of the city behind me. Then a click, and a new voice came on the line. Elijah, the voice said. It was warm like aged bourbon, but sharp like broken glass. I thought you were retired. I thought you were growing tomatoes and watching baseball. I was Silas, I said, watching a patrol car cruise slowly past the intersection. But someone broke into my garden. I need a cleaner, Silas, and I need a shark. There was a soft chuckle on the other end. Well, old friend, you know I am both. What is the damage? My son has been taken by the cartel, I said, my voice flat. My daughter-in-law is trying to steal an estate that doesn't exist, and I am technically a missing person heading for Canada. I heard the sound of a pen scratching on paper. Sounds like a Tuesday, Silas said. Where are you? I told him. Stay there, he said. I will send a car. And Elijah? Yes. Do not kill anyone yet. It makes the paperwork very tedious. I hung up the phone. I leaned against the cold brick wall of the liquor store and closed my eyes. Darius was suffering right now. He was scared and he was in pain. Good. Pain is a teacher. Pain clarifies the mind. I would save him. I would pull him out of the fire just like I had pulled Silas out all those years ago. But first he had to burn a little. He had to burn away the weakness. He had to burn away the lies. When I was done with him, he might hate me, but he would be alive, and he would be free of her. A black town car turned the corner, gliding toward me like a shark in dark water. The game had moved to the next level. I wasn't just a father defending his home anymore. I was a client. And I had just hired the most dangerous man in Chicago to represent my interests. Tiffany wanted to play chess with estate laws and probate courts. She wanted to use the system to bury me. She was about to find out that the system has teeth, and I had just let them off the leash. I sat in the high-backed leather chair of the hotel suite, sipping a glass of water that cost $9 a bottle and watching my daughter-in-law perform the greatest acting role of her life on a 60-inch television screen. The volume was turned up just enough to hear the catch in her voice, the wet sniffle she had practiced in the mirror. She was standing on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by a flock of reporters who smelled blood. She was wearing black, modest, understated. She looked like a grieving widow before her husband was even dead. My father-in-law, Elijah King, she sobbed, leaning into the cluster of microphones, is a man who needs help. We believe he is suffering from a rapid onset of dementia. He has been confused lately, paranoid, and now he has disappeared. She paused to wipe a tear that wasn't there. But it is not just that he is missing, she continued, her voice hardening just a fraction. We have reason to believe that in his confusion he has emptied the family accounts. He has taken the legacy meant for his son and grandchildren. We are asking the court for an emergency freeze on all assets. We just want to bring him home safely. We just want to protect him from himself. I took a sip of water. It tasted cold and clean. She was good. I had to give her that. She was painting a masterpiece. In 5 minutes, she had turned me from a victim into a senile thief. She had positioned herself as the concerned guardian, the protector of the family legacy. She was laying the groundwork to seize everything. If I was dead or missing, and Darius was missing, she would be the court-appointed conservator. She would have the keys to the kingdom. But Tiffany made one critical mistake. She assumed the kingdom was just a savings account and a paid-off house. She assumed she knew the size of the board she was playing on. She didn't know that for 30 years I wasn't just a driver. I put the glass down on the marble coaster. I turned away from the television and opened the laptop Silas had provided. It was a secure machine encrypted, connected to a server in the Cayman Islands. Silas was sitting on the sofa across the room reading a newspaper. He didn't look up. "She is moving fast," he said. "Her lawyer just filed an ex parte motion. The judge will sign it within the hour. They will freeze your known accounts by noon." I cracked my knuckles. "Then we have 59 minutes. I logged into the banking portal. It wasn't a standard consumer bank. It was a private wealth management interface, the kind that doesn't have billboards or commercials. The screen loaded. The balance flashed in green numbers. It was not the nest egg of a truck driver. It was the war chest of a titan. See, Darius never asked where I went during the trucker strikes of the 80s. He never asked how I managed to pay for his private school on a driver's salary. He saw the grease under my fingernails and assumed I was just a laborer. He didn't know that in 1989 I quietly bought 40% of Midwest Freight and Logistics. I didn't put my name on the door. I used a shell company. I did it because back then union leaders who flashed money got their houses firebombed. I did it to protect my wife. I did it to protect Darius. I wanted him to grow up normal. I wanted him to be hungry, not entitled. So I let the world think I was just Elijah, the reliable employee. I took my dividends and I buried them. I reinvested, I compounded. And when I sold my stake 10 years ago, I didn't buy a yacht. I bought anonymity. But anonymity was over. Today the ghost had to become flesh. I navigated to the transfer screen. I wasn't just moving money. I was moving history. "You are sure about this?" Silas asked, finally looking up over his reading glasses. "Once you move this to the irrevocable trust, you cannot touch it easily. It locks down." "I am sure," I said. I typed in the account numbers for the new trust Silas had set up that morning. It was a blind trust administered by a firm in Zurich. Even if the judge signed Tiffany's order, it would be a piece of paper chasing a phantom. The money would be gone, vaporized from the U.S. banking system. I looked at the number one last time. 8 figures, a lifetime of smart bets and hard work. Tiffany thought she was freezing the accounts of a confused old man. She thought she was securing a few $100,000, maybe $1 million if she was lucky. I pressed the enter key. The screen refreshed. "Transfer processing." On the television, Tiffany was wrapping up her performance. "Please," she begged, looking directly into the camera, "if anyone sees Elijah King, please call the police. He is not himself. He might be dangerous." I watched the progress bar on my laptop. 20%. She was right about one thing. I was dangerous. But not because I was confused. I was dangerous because I was focused. 40%. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the unknown number, the cartel. They weren't watching the news. They were watching the clock. "Darius is screaming a lot, old man. He says you have a safe. Give us the combination or we send you a finger." I ignored it. Darius needed to scream. He needed to understand that there are consequences for signing contracts you cannot honor. He was in hell right now, but hell is a refinery. It burns away the impurities. If he survived, he would be harder. If he didn't, well, then he wasn't the son I thought he was. 60%. I pictured Tiffany leaving the courthouse. She would be walking to her car feeling triumphant. She would be calling her lawyer, telling him to execute the freeze. She would be driving to the bank branch downtown, the one where my primary personal accounts were held. She would have the court order in her hand, hot off the press. She would walk in there like she owned the place, demanding to see the manager, demanding full access to protect the assets. 80%. I could almost see the look on the bank manager's face. Mr. Henderson was a good man, but he was terrified of lawsuits. He would bow to the court order. He would type in my social security number. He would bring up the accounts. 99%. Transfer complete. The screen blinked. The balance in my personal accounts, the accounts linked to my social security number, the accounts Tiffany and Darius knew about, and the secret investment accounts they didn't, it all zeroed out. 0.00. I closed the laptop. "It is done," I said to Silas. Silas nodded. He folded his newspaper. "Good. Now she is holding a bucket with a hole in the bottom. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the Chicago streets. Somewhere down there, Tiffany was walking into a bank. I wasn't there to see it, but I knew exactly how it would play out. Tiffany marched into the First National Bank branch at 11:45 a.m. She was flanked by her lawyer, a man named Gresham, who charged $600 an hour and smelled like expensive gin. She slammed the emergency court order onto the desk of the branch manager. "We need these accounts frozen immediately," she demanded, her voice loud enough to turn heads in the lobby. "And we need a full printout of all balances and recent activity. My client is the court-appointed conservator." The manager, Mr. Henderson, looked at the paperwork. It was signed by a judge. It was legal. He had no choice. "Of course, Mrs. King," he said, typing nervously. "One moment, please." Tiffany tapped her foot. She was already spending the money in her head. She was paying off the cartel. She was buying a new car. She was securing her future. She looked at her lawyer and smiled. It was a smile of pure victory. Mr. Henderson frowned at his screen. He typed something else. He hit enter again. His face went pale. "Is there a problem?" Tiffany asked, her smile faltering. Mr. Henderson turned the monitor so she could see. "I am sorry, Mrs. King," he said, his voice trembling. "I cannot freeze the assets." "Why not?" she snapped. "Because there are no assets to freeze." Tiffany leaned forward, clutching the edge of the desk. Her eyes scanned the screen. She saw my name. She saw the account numbers. And then she saw the balance. $0. She blinked. She thought it was a mistake. She looked at the transaction history. One withdrawal, executed 4 minutes ago. Total liquidation. "Where is it?" she screamed. "Where did it go?" Mr. Henderson shook his head. "It was a wire transfer, ma'am. To an international trust. It is gone. The account is closed." Tiffany's legs gave out. She slumped into the chair. The court order in her hand fluttered to the floor like a dead leaf. She had played her hand. She had gone all in. She had kidnapped her husband's dignity and buried her father-in-law's reputation, and she had won absolutely nothing. Back in the hotel room, I poured myself a drink. I toasted the television screen where the news was now moving on to the weather. "You wanted the money, Tiffany," I whispered. "You wanted the power. Well, you can have the receipt." The phone rang again. It was the cartel. They were done waiting. I picked up. "Tell Darius," I said before they could speak. "Tell him his inheritance just left the country. And tell him if he wants to live, he better start talking about where you are holding him." I hung up. The money was safe. Tiffany was broken. Now it was time to get my son back. Not because he deserved it, but because he was mine. And nobody touches what is mine. The phone rang at 4 in the afternoon, and the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet of my hotel suite. I knew who it was before I picked it up. I knew because 10 minutes ago I had received a text from my old friend in Montreal, a simple text, "Package delivered." I pressed the answer button and put the phone on speaker. I sat back in the chair, my hands folded over my stomach, my breathing steady and calm. "You think this is funny, old man?" The voice was no longer cold and detached. It was jagged with rage. I could hear the background noise of a warehouse or a garage, the echo of metal on concrete, the sound of men shouting in Spanish. "I do not have a sense of humor," I replied, my voice flat. "I am a logistics man. I sent you a package. Did it arrive safely?" There was a sound of something breaking on the other end. A chair, maybe, or a bone. "We found your box," the man snarled. "We found your little tracker, and we found your note. You know who we are." "Good. Then you know what we do to people who steal from us. You know what we do to liars." "I did not steal from you," I said. "My son sold you a lie. He sold you a fortune that he did not own. I just moved the assets to safety. That is just business." "Business," the man screamed. "You think this is business? We are going to cut him into pieces, Elijah. We are going to send him to you in envelopes, one piece at a time." Then I heard it. The sound I had been dreading but expecting. Darius screaming. It wasn't a scream of fear anymore. It was a scream of pure agony. A scream that stripped away the veneer of the man he pretended to be and left only the terrified child underneath. "Pop, please." Darius sobbed, his voice wet and broken. "Pop, tell them. Tell them about the safe. The floor safe in the den. Tell them the combination. Please, Pop, they are going to kill me." I closed my eyes. The floor safe. I hadn't used that safe in 20 years. It was buried under the rug in the den. It was an old mechanical lock, rusted and heavy. Inside there was nothing but dust and maybe a few silver dollars my father had given me. But Darius didn't know that. Darius remembered seeing me open it once when he was a boy. He remembered the heavy click of the tumblers. In his desperate mind, that safe had become the answer. He had convinced himself that the millions I had moved were sitting in cash inside that steel box. And he had convinced them. "He says there is cash in the house," the man on the phone said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He says there is a floor safe. Millions, he says. If you go to my house," I said, carefully choosing my words to bait the trap, "you will find what you deserve." The man laughed. "We are coming, Elijah, and we are bringing your boy. If the money is there, he lives. If it is not, we paint your walls with him." The line went dead. I stood up. I did not rush. Rushing leads to mistakes. I put on my coat. I checked the load in my Colt 1911. I picked up the thick envelope of evidence I had gathered over the last 48 hours, the transcripts, the recordings, the tracking data. Then I called Sergeant Miller. I did not call 911. I called his direct line. "Miller," I said when he answered, "they are coming to the house. Who is Elijah? The men who took Darius. They are coming for a safe in the floor of my den. They are bringing Darius with them. They are armed and they are desperate." "Where are you, Elijah?" "I am close," I said. "Miller, I am sending you a file. It is the audio of the extortion. It is the proof that this isn't a domestic dispute. It is a kidnapping and attempted murder. You need a SWAT team, Miller, and you need to be quiet. They cannot know you are there until they are inside." I heard Miller shouting orders in the background. "Elijah, do not engage. Do you hear me? Do not go back to that house." "I am just a witness, Sergeant," I said. "I will be waiting." I drove the gray Impala back to my neighborhood. I parked 3 streets away. The snow had stopped, but the wind was howling, whipping through the power lines like a banshee. I walked through the backyards, moving through the shadows of the houses I had known for 30 years. I knew which fences squeaked. I knew which dogs barked. I moved like a ghost until I was positioned behind Mrs. Higgins's garage. I had a direct line of sight to my back door. The police were already there. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were there. Miller was a professional. He would have his men inside the perimeter, hidden in the neighbors' houses, hidden in the unmarked vans down the street. They were waiting. The street looked empty. The house looked dark and abandoned. It was the perfect trap. 20 minutes later, the van appeared. It was the same black Mercedes Sprinter. It rolled down the alley, lights off, engine humming low. It stopped at my back gate. The side door slid open. 3 men jumped out. They were dressed in tactical gear, black on black, holding short-barreled rifles. Professional muscle. The kind the cartel sends when they want to make a statement. Then they dragged Darius out. My son was unrecognizable. His face was swollen, a mask of purple and red. His expensive clothes were torn to ribbons. He was limping, dragging one leg as if it were broken. He was sobbing quietly, a sound of utter defeat. They pushed him toward the back door. One of the men kicked the lock. The door shattered inward. They pushed Darius inside. I watched them disappear into the darkness of my home. I checked my watch. 1 minute. They would be dragging him to the den. They would be ripping up the rug. 2 minutes. They would find the safe. They would put a gun to Darius's head and tell him to open it. Darius would try. His shaking, bloody fingers would spin the dial. He would pray that the combination he remembered from 30 years ago was right. 3 minutes. He would open it. The door would swing wide, and they would see that it was empty. That was the moment of realization, the moment when the greed turned to panic. I saw a flash of light from the den window, then a shout, then the world exploded. Flashbangs detonated inside the house, turning the windows into strobe lights. The sound was deafening, a concussive thump that shook the snow off the trees. Police. Get down. Get down. The shouting was chaotic. I heard glass breaking. I heard the distinct pop, pop, pop of gunfire. I didn't flinch. I stayed in the shadows watching. The back door flew open. One of the gunmen tried to run. He made it 3 steps into the yard before a sniper took out his leg. He went down screaming. More police swarmed from the alley, armored vests, helmets, shields. They poured into the house like black water. They dragged the other 2 gunmen out in handcuffs. Then they brought the leader, the man with the raspy voice. He was bleeding from the scalp, cursing, spitting at the officers. And finally they brought Darius. He wasn't in handcuffs yet. He was staggering, supported by 2 officers. He looked shell-shocked. He looked around wildly, his eyes wide and white in the darkness. He was looking for a savior. He was looking for his father. He saw Miller standing by the van. Darius lunged toward him, grabbing the sergeant's arm. "Thank God," Darius screamed. "Thank God you came. They were going to kill me. I am the victim. You have to help me. My wife can explain." Miller looked at Darius. He looked at the bruised face, the torn clothes, and then he looked at the evidence I had sent him. The audio files, the texts. Miller pulled his arm away. He gestured to one of the officers. "Cuff him," Miller said. Darius froze. "What?" he stammered. No, I am the victim. They kidnapped me. You are a suspect in a conspiracy to defraud and murder Elijah King," Miller said, his voice carrying over the wind. "We have the recordings, Darius. We have the texts. We know you set it up. We know you hired them. We know you sold your father out." The officer spun Darius around and slammed him against the side of the van. The handcuffs clicked. That sound, that metallic final click, it was the loudest sound in the world. Darius started to scream, not in pain, but in denial. No, it was Tiffany. It was her idea. I didn't want to. She made me. He was still doing it. Even at the end, even with the cold steel on his wrists, he was trying to sell someone else to save himself. I stepped out from behind the garage. I walked into the light of the police cruisers. Miller saw me. He nodded. Darius saw me too. He stopped screaming. He stared at me, his mouth open, his eyes filled with a mix of shame and desperate hope. "Pop," he whispered. "Pop, tell them I am your son." I walked up to him. I looked at the boy I had raised. I looked at the man who had crawled under my truck to mark me for death. I looked at the man who was willing to let the cartel torture me to get a fortune he hadn't earned. I stood 3 feet away from him, close enough to smell the blood and the fear. I leaned in close. "I heard the recording, Darius," I said softly. "I heard you tell them to burn everything I love," Darius sobbed. "I didn't mean it, Pop. I was scared. I know I said, but fear doesn't make you a monster son. Choices do. And you made yours." I turned my back on him. "Take him away, Sergeant," I said to Miller. "Pop, no Pop. Look at me." I didn't look back. I walked toward Miller's cruiser. The ambulance was waiting, but I didn't need it. My wounds weren't physical. "Is that everyone?" Miller asked me as the squad car carrying my son pulled away, lights flashing against the snow. "Not everyone," I said, staring at the dark skyline of the city. "There is one more," I said. "The architect." Miller followed my gaze. "You mean the wife?" I nodded. "Tiffany. She is probably sitting in a hotel room right now, drinking champagne and waiting for the call that says, 'I am dead.' She thinks she has won. She thinks she is the smartest person in the room." "We will pick her up," Miller said. "We have enough to bring her in." "No," I said, "not yet." I looked at Miller. The look in my eyes made the seasoned cop take a step back. "Darius was the hammer," I said, "but Tiffany was the hand that swung it. If you arrest her now, she will lawyer up. She will blame Darius. She will say she was a victim of a gambling addict husband. She will walk away with a slap on the wrist." I opened the door of the Impala. "I need her to break," I said. "I need her to show the world who she really is." "Where are you going?" Elijah Miller asked. "I am going to the hospital," I said. "Darius needs a visitor, and Tiffany needs a show. I am going to put on a suit, Miller. I am going to walk into that hospital room, and I am going to let Tiffany think she has one last chance to win. And when she reaches for it, I am going to close the trap." The sterile air of the intensive care unit smelled of rubbing alcohol and despair. I stood in the corridor just out of sight of room 402, watching the monitor that Sergeant Miller had set up in the nurse's station. The screen showed a black and white feed of my son lying in a hospital bed. Darius looked small. The swelling on his face had turned a deep purple and his leg was elevated in a cast. He was handcuffed to the rail, a constant reminder that he was not just a victim, but a criminal. Miller stood next to me, arms crossed. "She is in the lobby," Miller said, checking his watch. "She told the desk nurse she is here to comfort her husband. She has a notary with her." I nodded. Of course she did. Tiffany wasn't coming to hold Darius's hand. She wasn't coming to weep over his injuries. She was coming to close the deal. In her mind, I was either dead in a ditch or halfway to Mexico. In her mind, Darius was the sole heir to an estate she believed was worth millions. She needed his signature before the police started asking too many questions or before the banks froze the accounts. "Let her in," I said. Miller signaled the uniformed officer at the door. I adjusted my cuffs. I was not wearing my canvas jacket today. I was not wearing my work boots. For 30 years I had dressed like a man who lived paycheck to paycheck. I had worn the costume of the humble retiree because it kept me safe and it kept me humble. But the time for costumes was over. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit cut from Italian wool. My shirt was crisp white silk. My shoes were handmade leather polished to a mirror shine. I wore a vintage Patek Philippe watch on my wrist, a piece that cost more than the house Darius lived in. This was the man I really was. This was the man who had built a logistics empire from the ground up. This was the man Darius had never bothered to get to know. I watched the screen. The door to room 402 opened. Tiffany walked in. She was dressed for a funeral in a tasteful black dress that showed just enough leg to be distracting. She looked concerned. She looked devastated. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. She rushed to the bedside. "Oh, Darius," she cried, reaching out to touch his uninjured arm. "Look at you, my poor baby. I was so scared." Darius tried to sit up but winced. The pain must have been blinding. "Tiff," he croaked, his voice dry and cracked. They almost killed me." "I know, baby, I know," she soothed, brushing hair off his sweaty forehead. "But you are safe now. I am here." She waited exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds of comfort before she pivoted to business. She reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "Listen to me, honey," she said, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "We have to protect ourselves. The police are asking questions. People are saying your father—" She paused, looking down as if overcome with grief. "People are saying Elijah is gone, Darius. They found his truck near the border, but he wasn't in it. They think the worst." Darius started to cry. "No," he sobbed. "Pop." "We have to be realistic," Tiffany said, hardening her tone. "If he is gone, the state will try to take everything. They will freeze the accounts. We will be left with nothing. You know how much debt we have, Darius. You know the people looking for you. If we don't secure the inheritance now, we are dead." She uncapped a pen and pressed it into his shaking hand. "This is just a power of attorney," she lied smoothly. "It gives me the right to secure your father's assets until he is found, or until the estate settles. Just sign here, baby. Do it for us. Do it so we can survive." Darius held the pen. He looked at the paper. He looked at his wife. He was broken. He was in pain. And he was used to doing what she told him. He was a man who had spent his life looking for the easy way out, and she was offering him a lifeline, or a noose. He moved the pen toward the paper. That was my cue. I nodded to Miller. He keyed his radio. "Clear the hall." I walked down the corridor. My leather soles made a sharp, authoritative click on the linoleum. It was a sound of power, a sound of command. I stopped at the door of room 402. I did not knock. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room went silent. Tiffany spun around, a look of annoyance on her face, ready to scold a nurse or a doctor. But the words died in her throat. Her eyes went wide. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Darius dropped the pen. It clattered onto the bedside table. He stared at me. He blinked as if he were hallucinating. He didn't recognize me at first. He saw the suit. He saw the watch. He saw the cold, hard set of my jaw. He saw a stranger. A powerful, dangerous stranger. "Pop," he whispered finally. I walked into the room, filling the space with a gravity that made the air feel heavy. I did not look at Darius. I looked at Tiffany. I looked her up and down with the same dispassionate scrutiny I used to inspect a shipping container. I saw the fear blooming in her eyes. I saw her brain working, trying to calculate the odds, trying to spin a new lie. "Elijah," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, you are alive. We were so worried. You thought I was dead," I said, my voice low and smooth. "You thought the men you hired had done their job. Or maybe you thought I had frozen to death in a ditch somewhere in Michigan." "What no?" she cried, backing away until she hit the wall. "Elijah, I don't know what you are talking about. I am just here to help Darius. I am trying to save our family." "Save the family," I repeated. "Is that what you call this?" I pointed to the papers on the bed. I picked them up. I scanned the legal jargon. It wasn't just a power of attorney. It was a full transfer of assets. It was a document that would have given her total control over everything Darius owned and by extension everything he stood to inherit. It was a theft, pure and simple. I dropped the papers on the floor. They scattered like trash. Pop Darius said, his voice weak. "You are okay. You came back." I turned to look at my son. He looked pathetic. He looked like a man who had been chewed up and spit out by the world. And in a way he had been. But he had jumped into the mouth of the beast willingly. "You look surprised, Darius," I said. I thought you were gone," he said, tears leaking from his eyes. "The cartel, they said what I prompted. They said I ran away. They said I left you to die." He nodded, shame coloring his bruised face. "I didn't run, son," I said, stepping closer to the bed. "I repositioned. There is a difference." I looked at his handcuffs. I looked at the cast on his leg. "You asked me a question once, Darius, years ago. You asked me why I never bought a new car, why I lived in that old house. You asked me if I was poor." Darius nodded slowly. "I am not poor," I said. "I never was. I own 40% of the logistics grid that moves freight through the Midwest. I have money, Darius. Real money. The kind of money that buys politicians. The kind of money that makes problems disappear." Darius's eyes widened. He looked at the suit. He looked at the watch. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had sold his father for a fraction of what he could have had if he had just been loyal, if he had just been a good son. "But I didn't tell you," I continued, my voice hard, "because I wanted to see who you were without it. I wanted to see if you could be a man on your own." I looked at Tiffany. She was pale, shaking her back, pressed against the wall. And I wanted to see who she really was. Tiffany found her voice. "Elijah, please. I didn't know. We can fix this. I love Darius. I was just trying to secure his future." "Love," I scoffed. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a thick envelope. It wasn't the legal papers she had brought. It was a package from my private investigator. I tossed the envelope onto the bed. It landed on Darius's chest. "Open it," I commanded. Darius looked at me, then at the envelope. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely work the clasp. He pulled out a stack of photographs. High-resolution, glossy prints. The first photo showed Tiffany sitting at a cafe table holding hands with a man in a silver suit. The second photo showed them kissing in a car. The third photo showed them walking into a hotel room. The man in the photos wasn't a stranger. It was Gresham, the family lawyer. The man Tiffany had hired to handle the estate. The man she had been conspiring with to declare me dead. Darius stared at the photos. He made a sound like a wounded animal. A low, keening wail that filled the room. He looked up at Tiffany. His eyes were full of betrayal, full of horror. "You and Gresham," he whispered. Tiffany didn't deny it. She couldn't. The proof was right there in Technicolor. Her face twisted. The mask of the grieving wife fell away completely, leaving something ugly and snarling underneath. So what? She spat. "You are a loser, Darius. You are a gambling junkie who lost our savings. You dragged me down. Gresham is a winner. He knows how to get things done. He was helping me get what I deserved. What you deserved," I said, stepping between them. "You deserved a husband who worked hard. Maybe you didn't get that. But you didn't deserve my money. And you certainly didn't deserve to orchestrate a kidnapping." "Kidnapping," she laughed, a high hysterical sound. "You can't prove that. Darius did it. He hired them. He is the one with the debts. I am just the wife cleaning up the mess." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "We will see what the jury thinks," I said. I nodded to the door. Sergeant Miller walked in, followed by 2 officers. Tiffany Vance, Miller said, taking out his handcuffs. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, fraud, and attempted murder." Tiffany screamed. She lunged at me, her nails raking the air, but the officers caught her. They wrestled her arms behind her back. The handcuffs clicked. "You can't do this," she shrieked as they dragged her out of the room. "I have rights. Call Gresham." "Call my lawyer. Gresham is already in custody," I called after her. "We picked him up at his office an hour ago. He is very eager to cut a deal. He is telling us everything, Tiffany, every dirty detail." The door closed, cutting off her screams. Silence returned to the hospital room. The only sound was the beeping of the heart monitor and Darius's quiet sobbing. He looked at the photos scattered on his sheets. He looked at the empty doorway where his wife had been. Then he looked at me. "Pop," he said, his voice broken. "I am sorry, I didn't know. I didn't. I swear I didn't know about her and Gresham. I know I said. You were a fool, Darius. You were weak. You let a woman manipulate you into trying to kill your own father." "I am sorry," he repeated, weeping openly now. "Help me, Pop. Please, get me a lawyer. Get me out of this. You have the money now. You can fix this." I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had crawled under my truck with a tracker in his hand. I looked at the man who had given the cartel my address. I adjusted my cuffs. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. "I do have the money, Darius," I said softly. "I have enough money to buy this hospital. I have enough money to hire the best defense team in the state." Darius's eyes lit up with hope. A pathetic, desperate hope. "But I am not going to spend a dime on you," I said. The hope vanished, replaced by a cold void. "You made a deal with the devil's son," I said, turning toward the door. "And now the bill is due." "Pop, wait. Where are you going?" I opened the door. "I'm going to work," I said. "I have a company to run." I walked out of the room. I walked down the corridor, my footsteps echoing on the tile. I didn't look back. I didn't feel guilt. I felt lighter. The toxicity was gone. The parasite had been removed. I walked out of the hospital into the cold Chicago air. My driver was waiting with the door of the Rolls-Royce open. "Where to, Mr. King?" he asked. "The office," I said, sliding into the leather seat. It was time to build something new, something that would last. And this time I would be careful who I let in the front door. I thought the war was over when I walked out of that hospital room, leaving my son weeping and my daughter-in-law in handcuffs. I thought I had cut the head off the snake. I went back to my office, the headquarters of a logistics empire I had built from the asphalt up, and for the first time in days I allowed myself to breathe. I sat in my leather chair looking out at the Chicago skyline, watching the snow turn to slush under the tires of a million commuters. I drank a cup of black coffee and let the silence wash over me. But I should have known better. You do not survive in my business by assuming the enemy is dead just because they stopped moving. You check the pulse. You put 2 in the chest. I underestimated Tiffany Vance. I saw her as a greedy social climber, a parasite attached to my son. I forgot that parasites are survivors. I forgot that she was a woman who knew how to weaponize her tears and her skin. It started 3 hours after the arrest. I was reviewing the quarterly reports when my assistant buzzed me. Her voice was shaking. "Mr. King," she said, "you need to turn on the news." Channel 5. I picked up the remote and clicked the television on. There she was. Tiffany. She wasn't in a jail cell. She wasn't wearing an orange jumpsuit. She was standing on the steps of the precinct, surrounded by a phalanx of microphones and cameras. She was out on bail. Her father, a man with deep pockets and shallow morals, had posted the bond before the ink was even dry on the arrest report. She looked into the cameras, her eyes wide and terrified, her makeup artfully smeared. She didn't look like a woman who had just been caught plotting a murder. She looked like a victim. I was so scared she sobbed, her voice trembling perfectly for the evening news cycle. My husband and I, we are victims. We are victims of a man who has controlled our lives for years, a man who runs a criminal enterprise under the guise of a trucking company. She pointed a shaking finger at the lens as if she were pointing it directly at my chest. "Elijah King is not a victim," she declared, her voice hardening with a righteous fury that made my stomach turn. "He orchestrated all of this, the kidnapping of my husband, the disappearance. It was all a smokescreen. A distraction." The reporters leaned in, hungry for the twist. "Why would he do that?" one shouted. "To hide the money," Tiffany said. "He is under investigation for tax evasion. He has millions hidden in offshore accounts. He staged this whole thing. My husband's abduction, his own missing person report to move the assets out of the country while the police were looking the other way. He used us. He used his own son as a decoy. And when I found out, when I tried to go to the police, he framed me. He planted evidence. He threatened to kill us." I watched the screen, my coffee turning cold in my hand. It was a lie so bold, so audacious, that it took my breath away. She was flipping the board. She knew she couldn't win on the facts, so she was playing to the optics. She was a young, beautiful white woman crying on camera. And I was a wealthy black man with a mysterious past and a lot of power. She knew exactly what story the world wanted to believe. The narrative spread like a virus. Within an hour, the headlines had changed. They weren't talking about a brave father saving his son anymore. They were talking about the kingpin of Chicago. They were asking questions about where my money came from. They were asking why a retired truck driver had a Swiss trust fund. Then the sirens came. They didn't come quietly this time. There was no professional courtesy from Sergeant Miller. Miller wasn't even there. This was a different breed of law enforcement. I looked out the window and saw 4 black SUVs pulling up to the curb. Men in windbreakers with yellow letters on the back jumped out. State Police. Financial Crimes Division. They came through the front doors of my building like a storm. My receptionist tried to stop them, but they flashed badges and pushed past her. They marched into my office. Elijah King, the lead detective, barked. He was a man with a square jaw and eyes that looked like they had seen too many bad movies. "You are coming with us." "Am I under arrest?" I asked, remaining seated. "You are being detained for questioning regarding money laundering, tax fraud, and filing a false police report," the detective said. "And we have a warrant to freeze your assets pending an investigation into the source of your funds." Freeze my assets. Tiffany had done it. She hadn't been able to steal the money, so she had done the next best thing. She had locked it down. She had used the system, the very system I had tried to use against her, to put shackles on me. I stood up. I smoothed my jacket. I did not resist. Resisting gives them what they want. It gives them the image of the angry, violent man. I walked out of my building in handcuffs. The cameras were waiting. Flashes popped like lightning. I saw Tiffany standing across the street near a news van. She wasn't crying anymore. She was watching me. And for a split second she smiled. It was a small, cold smile. The smile of a predator who has wounded the lion. They took me to a building downtown. Not a regular precinct. This was where they took the white-collar criminals, the politicians, and the mob bosses. They put me in a room with gray walls and a steel table bolted to the floor. They left me there for 2 hours. It was a power move. They wanted me to sweat. They wanted me to stew in my own fear. But I didn't sweat. I sat perfectly still. I closed my eyes and went back to 1998. I went back to a rainy night in November when a young district attorney had made a mistake that would have ended his career before it began. I went back to the phone call I had received and the car I had driven and the problem I had made disappear. Not with violence, but with logistics, with silence. That young district attorney was now the governor of Illinois. The door opened. 2 detectives walked in. One was the square-jawed man from my office. The other was a younger man holding a thick file. They sat down opposite me. "Mr. King," the older one said, opening a laptop, "we have looked at your accounts. You moved $14 million to a blind trust in Zurich yesterday morning. That is a lot of money for a retired union worker." "It is my money," I said calmly. "I earned it. I paid taxes on it." "Your daughter-in-law says otherwise," the detective said. "She says that money comes from illegal shipments. She says you used your trucking company to move things that weren't on the manifest. She says the kidnapping of your son was a setup to explain why you were fleeing the jurisdiction." "She is lying," I said. "She is a desperate woman facing 20 years for attempted murder." The detective leaned forward. "She has sworn affidavits. She has text messages from your son saying he was afraid of you. We have a witness who says you threatened to kill them both in the hospital." Darius, I thought. My weak, foolish son. She had gotten to him again. Even from a hospital bed, even after I saved him, he was so terrified of her, so broken by her that he was backing her play. Or maybe she had promised him a cut. Maybe she had convinced him that if they took me down, they would get the money after all. "It does not matter what she says," I said. "The evidence is on my side." The detective slammed his hand on the table. "The evidence looks like a shell game, Mr. King. It looks like a man cleaning house before the feds kick down his door. We have frozen the trust. We have frozen your personal accounts. We have seized your property. You are not going anywhere." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "You are going to prison, Elijah, unless you cooperate, unless you tell us where the rest of it is, unless you admit that the kidnapping was a hoax." I looked at him. I looked at the mirror on the wall, knowing there were people watching from the other side. They thought they had me. They thought I was just an old man with a dirty past. They thought the color of my skin and the size of my bank account meant I was guilty by default. I leaned back in my chair. The handcuffs dug into my wrists, but I didn't flinch. "I am done talking to you," I said. The detective laughed. "You don't have a choice. You are in my house now." "No," I said softly. "I am not." I looked him dead in the eye. "I want my phone call." "You can call your lawyer," the detective sneered. "It won't help." "I don't want to call my lawyer," I said. "I want you to pick up that phone on the wall. I want you to dial a number. And I want you to tell the person on the other end that Elijah King is sitting in your interrogation room." "And who exactly should I call?" the detective asked, mocking me. "The president, no," I said. "Call the governor's private line." The detective blinked. He looked at his partner. They both smirked. "The governor," the partner said. "Sure." "Does he know you?" "Tell him," I said, my voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute silence. "Tell him Elijah King is here. And tell him I want to collect the debt from November 1998. The room went quiet. The smirk faded from the detective's face. He saw something in my eyes. He saw that this wasn't a bluff. He saw the history. November 1998. It was a date that never appeared in the papers. It was a date that didn't exist in the official record. But the governor knew it. He knew it because that was the night his life almost ended in a scandal involving a dead girl in a car trunk. He knew it because I was the one who drove the truck. I was the one who fixed the logistics. I was the one who made sure he had a future. He had promised me a favor, a blank check. I had never cashed it. I had saved it for a rainy day, and it was pouring outside. The detective hesitated. "Make the call," I said. "Or tomorrow morning when the governor finds out you held me here without making that call, you will be directing traffic in the smallest town in downstate Illinois." The detective stood up. He looked unsure, nervous. He picked up the receiver on the wall. He dialed the number I recited from memory. He waited. Then he spoke. "Yes. This is Detective Vance Financial Crimes. I have a suspect here. He is insisting I call this number. He says his name is Elijah King. He says to mention November 1998. The detective stopped talking. He listened. His face went pale. All the blood drained out of him, leaving him looking like a wax statue. He stood up straighter. "Yes, sir. Yes, Governor. I understand. Immediately, sir." "No, sir, I didn't know." "Yes, sir." He hung up the phone slowly, as if it were made of glass. He turned to look at me. There was fear in his eyes now. Pure, unadulterated fear. "Get these handcuffs off him," he whispered to his partner. "What do it now?" The partner scrambled to unlock my cuffs. I rubbed my wrists. I stood up. I adjusted my tie. "Am I free to go, detective?" I asked. The detective swallowed hard. The governor would like to speak with you. He is sending his car." I nodded. "And my assets?" I asked. Unfrozen immediately, the detective said, his voice trembling. "It was a mistake, a clerical error. We will fix it." I walked to the door. I stopped and looked back at them. "Tiffany Vance filed a false report," I said. "She committed perjury on national television. She is trying to use your department as a weapon in a family dispute." "We will look into it, Mr. King," the detective said. "We will look into it right now." I walked out of the interrogation room. I walked through the precinct. The cops who had sneered at me on the way in now looked at the floor. I walked out into the cold night air. A black limousine with state plates was idling at the curb. Tiffany thought she had connections. She thought she had privilege. She was playing checkers. I was playing war. And I had just called in the nukes. The back of the governor's armored limousine was quiet enough to hear a pin drop on the carpeted floor. It was a mobile fortress of black leather and tinted glass, a bubble of absolute power moving through the chaotic streets of Chicago. I sat alone in the passenger cabin, rubbing my wrists where the handcuffs had been. The partition was up, separating me from the driver. There was a secure phone on the console. It was blinking. I picked it up. "Elijah," the voice on the other end said. It was the same voice I heard on the nightly news, the voice that promised lower taxes and safer streets. But right now it sounded like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "It has been a long time." 25 years, Governor," I said, leaning back into the seat. "Since that rainy night on the I-90, since the trunk of that blue sedan wouldn't close properly." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other line. I didn't need to say more. We both knew the history. I was a man who moved things. In November of 1998, I moved a problem that would have sent a young state attorney to prison instead of the governor's mansion. I didn't ask questions back then. I didn't look inside the bags. I just provided the logistics. I provided the silence. And silence is the most expensive commodity in politics. I thought we were square. Elijah the governor set his voice tight. I got the union contracts approved. I looked the other way on the diesel tax. We were square, I agreed. Until your state police dragged me out of my office in chains. Until they froze the accounts of a man who has kept your secrets for a quarter of a century. I didn't know it was you, the governor said quickly. The report said a money laundering suspect. A potential flight risk. If I had known, now you know, I interrupted. And now we are going to fix it. Name it Elijah. I looked out the tinted window as the city blurred by. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want a favor. I wanted a weapon. I want the Financial Crimes Division off my back, I said, and I want them pointed in the right direction. Which direction is that? Tiffany Vance, I said. My daughter-in-law. She runs Vance Luxury Properties. She has been moving money through shell companies for 3 years. She has been accepting cash deposits for condos that don't exist. She has been washing money for people who don't fill out tax returns. You have proof, the governor asked. I have the ledger, I lied. I didn't have the ledger, not yet. But I knew Tiffany. I knew she was greedy, and I knew she was sloppy. People who try to steal inheritances don't stop there. If she was desperate enough to kidnap her husband, she was desperate enough to cook the books at her firm. I will make the call, the governor said. The investigation will pivot. Is there anything else? One more thing, I said. The building on Wacker Drive, the one with the glass facade, who owns it? The governor paused, confused by the shift in topic. That is the Rutherford building. Old man Rutherford is looking to sell. Why? Because Tiffany Vance rents the top 3 floors for her headquarters, I said. And I am in the mood to buy some real estate. I hung up the phone. The conversation was over. The debt was paid. The limousine dropped me off at my hotel. I didn't go up to my room. I went to the business center. Silas was waiting for me. He looked tired, but he had a gleam in his eye, the look of a shark that smells blood in the water. You look good for a man who was just facing 20 years for fraud, Silas said. I have friends in low places, Silas, I said, taking the seat opposite him. And friends in high places, too. The freeze is lifted. The accounts are active. Silas nodded, tapping his pen on a stack of documents. Good, because you are going to need liquid capital. I looked into Vance Luxury Properties like you asked. You were right. She is over-leveraged. She has 3 mortgages on her own house, and she is 3 months behind on the rent for her office space. She is desperate, I said. She is drowning, Silas corrected. And she is using the company accounts to pay personal debts. It is a Ponzi scheme, Elijah. She is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Paul is the cartel, I finished. Exactly. I leaned forward. The building, Silas. The Rutherford building. Silas smiled. It is a Class A commercial property. 30 stories. Prime location. Rutherford wants $40 million for it. Buy it, I said. Silas didn't blink. He didn't ask if I was sure. He knew me. He knew that when I decided to move, I moved with the force of a freight train. It will take a few days to close escrow, usually, he said. Inspections. Due diligence. I don't have days, Silas. I have hours. I want the deed in my hand by lunch. Offer him $45 million, cash, no inspections, no contingencies, a same-day close. Silas whistled low and long. $45 million cash. That is a lot of money to spend just to evict your daughter-in-law. I am not just evicting her, Silas, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket. I am destroying her sanctuary. She thinks that office is her fortress. She thinks because her name is on the glass door she is untouchable. She thinks she is a queen in her castle. I walked to the window looking toward the financial district where the glass towers scratched the gray sky. I am going to show her that she is just a tenant. And the rent is overdue. Make the call, Silas. Get the papers drafted. I am going to pay a visit to my new property. Silas picked up his phone. I left the hotel. I didn't take the Impala this time. I took the Rolls-Royce. My driver, a quiet man named Marcus, who used to bounce at the toughest club on the south side, opened the door for me. The Rutherford building, I said. We drove through the city. The snow had turned to a cold drizzle, washing away the grime of the streets. I watched the people walking on the sidewalks, heads down against the wind. They didn't know that a war was being fought right above their heads. They didn't know that power wasn't about who shouted the loudest on the news. It was about who owned the pavement they walked on. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the governor's office. A simple thumbs-up emoji. Moments later, a notification popped up on the news ticker in the car. State police raid Vance luxury properties and money laundering probe. It had begun. The governor had kept his word. The Financial Crimes Division had pivoted. Right now, detectives were walking into Tiffany's office with boxes and warrants. They were seizing computers. They were freezing her accounts. But that wasn't enough. An investigation takes time. Lawyers can delay warrants. Tiffany could spin this. She could say it was a misunderstanding. She could blame an employee. I needed something immediate, something visceral. We pulled up to the curb in front of the Rutherford building. It was a monolith of steel and blue glass soaring into the clouds. It was beautiful, and it was mine. Silas called me as I stepped out of the car. "It is done," he said. "The wire transfer cleared. The deed is being couriered to you now. You are the owner of Record Elijah." "Thank you, Silas." I walked into the lobby. It was a cavernous space of marble and Art Deco fixtures. The security guard at the desk looked up. He saw an old black man in a suit, and he started to stand up, probably to ask if I had a delivery or an appointment. I walked past him to the directory. I saw it near the top. Vance Luxury Properties. Floors 2830. The guard stepped out from behind the desk. "Sir," he said, his voice firm. "Can I help you? You need a pass to go up." I turned to him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the digital transfer receipt Silas had sent me. I held it up. "I don't need a pass, son," I said. "I own the building." The guard looked at the phone. He looked at me. He looked at the name on the receipt, King Logistics Holdings. He swallowed. I didn't know, sir. Mr. Rutherford didn't say." "Mr. Rutherford is retiring," I said. "I am the new management, and I am going up to inspect my property, specifically the 28th floor." The guard stepped back and held his hand out toward the elevators. "Right away, Mr. King. The private elevator is on the right." I stepped into the elevator. It was lined with gold mirrors. I looked at my reflection. I saw the lines on my face. I saw the gray in my beard. I saw the eyes of a man who had been pushed too far. I pressed the button for the 28th floor. The elevator rose, smoothly, silently. My ears popped. Tiffany was up there. She was probably dealing with the police right now. She was probably screaming at them, throwing names around, trying to use her privilege as a shield. She didn't know that the ground beneath her feet had shifted. She didn't know that the walls around her didn't protect her anymore. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. I stepped out into the lobby of Vance Luxury Properties. It was opulent. White leather sofas, abstract art, a view of the lake that cost $1 million a year, and chaos. Uniformed officers were carrying boxes of files. A detective was talking to a crying receptionist. And in the middle of it all stood Tiffany. She was shouting at a police captain, pointing her finger in his face. Her face was red, her hair was disheveled. "You cannot do this," she screamed. "This is harassment. My father knows the mayor. I want these people out of my office immediately." I walked toward her. The sound of my shoes on the marble floor cut through the noise. The police captain looked up. He saw me. He didn't know who I was, but he saw the way I walked. He stepped back. Tiffany turned around. Her eyes went wide. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. "Elijah," she breathed. You are supposed to be in jail." I stopped 10 feet from her. I looked around the office. I looked at the view. "I was detained, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm, carrying over the commotion. "But misunderstandings have a way of clearing up when you have the right friends." "What are you doing here?" she hissed, regaining her venom. "Get out. This is my office. This is private property. Officer, arrest him. He is trespassing." The captain looked at me, waiting for an explanation. I reached into my jacket. I didn't pull out a gun. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. The temporary deed Silas had emailed, which I had printed in the business center. "I am not trespassing," I said, handing the paper to the captain. "I am the landlord." The captain read the paper. He looked at Tiffany. He smirked. "Looks like everything is in order, ma'am," he said. "Mr. King owns the building." Tiffany snatched the paper. Her hands shook so hard she ripped the corner. She read it. Her lips moved silently. $45 million. Cash. No, she whispered. No, this isn't possible. You are a truck driver. You are nobody. I am the man you tried to bury, I said, stepping into her personal space. I looked at her watch. You have breached the morality clause of your lease, Tiffany, I said. Criminal activity on the premises, money laundering, fraud. I checked my own watch. It is 11:30. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises. Anything left here at noon becomes the property of King Logistics. You can't kick me out, she screamed, throwing the paper at me. I have a lease. I have rights. I leaned in close. Read the fine print, Tiffany. I bought the building. I bought the debt. And I bought the air you are breathing. Get out. Tiffany looked around the room. She looked at her employees who were watching her with pity and fear. She looked at the police who were chuckling. She looked at her empire of glass and lies, and she realized it was over. She didn't scream again, she didn't fight, she just crumbled. I turned to the captain. Officer, I said, please ensure the tenant vacates in an orderly fashion, and if she isn't out by noon— I looked at Tiffany one last time. Arrest her for trespassing. The glass walls of the conference room on the 28th floor were designed to intimidate. They offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, a view that cost more per square foot than most families earned in a decade. Inside that fishbowl, Tiffany Vance was trying to pull off one last con. I stood outside the glass doors, flanked by the private security team I had brought from King Logistics. They were big men, silent men, men who wore suits that didn't quite hide the muscle underneath. We watched her. She was sitting at the head of a long mahogany table. Opposite her were three men in Italian suits. Investors, or maybe hard money lenders. They looked impatient. They looked like men who were used to getting their way. Tiffany was talking fast. I couldn't hear her through the soundproof glass, but I knew the body language. She was leaning forward, her hands chopping the air, her eyes wide and manic. She was selling. She was trying to trade her way out of the hole she had dug. She was probably leveraging assets she didn't own, promising returns she couldn't deliver, trying to secure enough liquid cash to run before the indictments came down. She didn't notice the silence that had fallen over the outer office. She didn't notice her employees packing boxes under the watchful eyes of the state police. She was too focused on the deal. I nodded to the head of my security team, a man named Marcus. Open it, I said. Marcus pushed the heavy glass doors. They swung open with a pneumatic hiss. The sound of Tiffany's voice spilled out. It is just a temporary liquidity issue, gentlemen, she was saying, her voice tight with forced charm. My father-in-law is currently unavailable, and there are some administrative holdups with the estate. But once the probate clears, you will see a 300% return on— She stopped. She saw me. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like a physical reaction, like a plug being pulled. Her mouth hung open mid-word. The three men turned in their swivel chairs. They looked at me. They looked at Marcus. They looked at the team of security guards filling the doorway. Who is this? One of the investors asked. He had a thick accent and cold eyes. Is this the father-in-law? Tiffany stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Get out, she shrieked. Her composure shattered instantly. This is a private meeting. You have no right to be here. Security, call security. I walked into the room. I walked past the investors who were now looking at Tiffany with sudden suspicion. I walked until I was standing at the other end of the table facing her. I am Security Tiffany, I said, my voice filling the room. And I am the landlord. She laughed, a high-pitched sound that bordered on hysteria. You are insane, she spat. You think because you waved a piece of paper around out there that you own this place? My lease is ironclad, Elijah. I have 5 years left on a 10-year contract. You can't just walk in here and disrupt my business. I will sue you for tortious interference. I will own you. I looked at the investors. Gentlemen, I said calmly, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you should know that the woman you are doing business with is currently the subject of a state police investigation for money laundering and fraud, and the asset she is promising you, the estate of Elijah King, do not exist. The investors stood up. They didn't say a word. They didn't look at Tiffany. They picked up their briefcases and walked out of the room. They were sharks, and they knew the smell of a bad deal. Tiffany watched them go. She reached out as if to grab them, but her hand fell to her side. She turned back to me, her eyes burning with hate. You ruined it, she hissed. You ruined everything. Do you know how much money that was? That was my exit strategy. I know, I said. That is why I am here. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It is 11:35, Tiffany, I said. You have 25 minutes remaining. I told you, she screamed, slamming her hands on the table. I have a lease. You can't evict me without a court order. It takes months. I know the law. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a copy of the commercial lease agreement Silas had obtained from the previous owner. I tossed it onto the polished wood of the conference table. It slid across the surface and stopped right in front of her. Turn to page 42, I said. Appendix 4. She stared at the document. She didn't move. Read it, Tiffany, I commanded. She didn't. So I recited it for her. I had memorized it on the ride over. The Morality and Criminal Conduct Clause, I said. It states that if the tenant or any principal officer of the tenant's company is under active investigation for a felony involving financial crimes, fraud, or moral turpitude, the landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease effectively immediately. No notice required. No eviction hearing. Immediate possession. Tiffany stared at me. Her chest was heaving. You are under investigation, Tiffany, I said, gesturing to the police officers outside the glass walls who were currently seizing her hard drives. That voids your contract. You are trespassing. She grabbed the contract and ripped it in half. She threw the pieces at me. I am not going anywhere, she screamed. This is my office. I built this. I deserve this. I nodded to Marcus. Time is up, I said. Marcus moved forward. 2 other guards moved with him. They weren't rough, but they weren't gentle. They were professionals moving a piece of unwanted cargo. Get your hands off me, Tiffany screeched as Marcus took her arm. Don't you dare touch me. I am Tiffany Vance. Your father isn't here, I cut her off, and neither is your lawyer. You are alone, Tiffany. She tried to pull away. She tried to dig her heels into the expensive carpet, but she was 120 pounds of fury against 300 pounds of discipline. They began to walk her toward the door. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the side table and swung it. Marcus caught her wrist in midair. He twisted it expertly, and the vase fell to the floor, shattering into 1,000 diamonds. That is property of King Logistics, ma'am, Marcus said calmly. That will be deducted from your security deposit. They dragged her out of the conference room. Her employees, the people she had bullied and belittled for years, stopped packing to watch. They stood in silence, holding their cardboard boxes. I saw no pity in their eyes. I saw relief. I saw the look of people who had been waiting for the tyrant to fall. Tiffany saw them too. She saw them watching her humiliation. Help me! She screamed at her assistant, a young woman with terrified eyes. Call the police. Tell them he is assaulting me. The assistant looked at Tiffany. Then she looked at me. Then she looked down at her box and continued packing. We walked her to the elevators. I pressed the call button. You are going to pay for this. Elijah Tiffany spat her hair falling in her face, her dignity in tatters. You think you have won? You haven't won anything. I will tell the press. I will tell them you hit me. I will tell them you forced me out. I will destroy your reputation. I smiled. The press is downstairs, Tiffany, I said. You called them, remember? You invited every news station in Chicago to cover the fall of the kingpin. The elevator doors opened. We stepped inside. The mirrored walls reflected her disheveled state. Her mascara was running. Her blouse was torn from the struggle. She looked exactly like what she was, a desperate criminal caught in the act. The ride down took 30 seconds. In those 30 seconds, she tried to bargain. Elijah, wait. She pleaded, her tone shifting instantly from aggression to manipulation. We can make a deal. I know where Darius hid the rest of the money. I can give you half. Just let me stay. Just let me keep the office. I need the image, Elijah. Without the image, I am nothing. I didn't answer. I just watched the floor numbers count down. Lobby. The doors opened. The flashbulbs were blinding. There were at least 20 reporters in the lobby. Camera crews from CNN, Fox, local affiliates. They had been waiting for hours. They had been waiting for me to be dragged out in chains. Instead, they got Tiffany. Marcus and his team marched her out of the elevator. She stumbled, blinking in the harsh lights. Mrs. Vance, the reporters shouted, surging forward. Is it true you are under investigation for money laundering? Is it true you staged your husband's kidnapping? What about the allegations of fraud? Tiffany looked at the cameras. She looked at the microphones thrust in her face. This was her element. This was the media she thought she controlled. But she couldn't control this. She couldn't spin being dragged out of her own building by security. She snapped. "Get away from me!" she screamed, lunging at a cameraman. "You vultures! Get away! It is all a lie! He is the criminal! Look at him. He is a black thug who stole my building." The racial slur hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. It was captured on 20 different microphones. It was broadcast live to millions of homes. The reporters gasped. The sympathy evaporated instantly. I stepped out of the elevator behind her. I buttoned my jacket. I looked calm. I looked in control. I looked like the owner, Ms. "Vance has been evicted for criminal conduct," I said, my voice carrying over the noise. "King Logistics has zero tolerance for fraud. And we have zero tolerance for hate." Tiffany tried to speak, but she was drowned out by the questions. "Are you racist, Mrs. Vance? Did you frame your father-in-law because of his race?" Marcus guided her toward the revolving doors. She was kicking and screaming, spitting venom. I watched her go. I watched her get pushed out onto the cold sidewalk where the wind whipped her hair and the snow soaked her expensive shoes. She was out. She was exposed. She was finished. I turned back to the lobby. The security guard at the desk nodded to me respectfully. I walked toward the private elevator. I had a building to inspect. I had a business to run. And I had a son to visit. The war for my reputation was won. The war for my property was won. Now it was time for the final act. It was time to close the book on Darius. 3 days after the incident at the hospital, my son was discharged. I was not there to pick him up. I had a business to run and a war to finish. I heard about it from the private investigator Silas had stationed in the lobby. He told me Darius walked out of the sliding glass doors wearing a pair of gray sweatpants a nurse had found for him and a windbreaker that was 2 sizes too small. He was limping heavily on his cast, his face a map of yellow and purple bruises. He looked like a man who had survived a car crash only to realize he had nowhere to go. He took a taxi to his house, the house he shared with Tiffany, the house with the marble countertops and the heated floors and the mortgage he couldn't afford. He probably thought he could go there and sleep. He probably thought he could hide in the master bedroom and pretend the last week hadn't happened, but he couldn't. When he put his key in the lock, it didn't turn. He tried again. He jiggled it. He kicked the door. Then he saw the notice taped to the glass. It was a foreclosure notice, but not from a bank. From King Logistics Holdings. See, I had bought his mortgage 3 days ago. It was a distressed asset. I picked it up for pennies on the dollar because the bank knew about the federal investigation into Tiffany, and as the new lien holder, I had exercised my right to secure the property. I had changed the locks. Darius stood on his own porch in the freezing wind, realizing he was homeless. He called Tiffany, but her phone was in an evidence locker at the state police headquarters. He called his friends, but nobody wants to know a man who is all over the news for kidnapping his own father. So he did the only thing he could do. He came to me. I was sitting in my suite at the Four Seasons. I had upgraded. The room smelled of fresh lilies and old money. I was drinking tea and reading the financial section of the Tribune when there was a knock at the door. I didn't get up. My security chief Marcus opened it. Darius stood in the hallway. He looked small. He looked broken. He looked like the boy who used to come crying to me when he scraped his knee on the playground. But that boy was gone. That boy had died a long time ago. "Let him in," I said. Darius limped into the room. He looked around at the luxury, at the view of the city skyline, at the silk curtains. He had never seen me like this. He had only known the father in the flannel shirt and the work boots. "Pop," he whispered. I didn't offer him a chair. I didn't offer him a drink. I just watched him. "You changed the locks," he said, his voice trembling. I went home and I couldn't get in. "It isn't your home, Darius," I said calmly. "It never was. You didn't pay the mortgage. Tiffany didn't pay the mortgage. You were squatting in a fantasy, and I evicted you." He flinched as if I had hit him. "But Pop, where am I supposed to go? I have nothing. Tiffany, she ruined me. She made me do it." He fell to his knees. It was a theatrical gesture, the kind he had learned from his wife. He crawled toward me, dragging his cast across the expensive carpet. "I am sorry," he sobbed, grabbing the hem of my trousers. "Please, Pop. I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. I made a mistake. I was scared. The cartel, they threatened me. I had to do what they said." I looked down at him. I felt a pang of something in my chest. Pity, maybe. Or just the ghost of the love I used to have. It would have been easy to forgive him. It would have been easy to say, "Get up, son, let us fix this." That is what fathers do. They fixed things. But I wasn't just a father anymore. I was a witness. And I had evidence. "Get up, Darius," I said, my voice cold. He looked up, hope flickering in his watery eyes. You forgive me." "Get up," I repeated sharper this time, "and sit in that chair." He scrambled into the armchair opposite me. He wiped his nose on his sleeve. "I knew you wouldn't abandon me," he said, a weak smile forming on his split lip. "We can start over, Pop. I can help you run the company. I can learn. I promise." I reached for the remote control on the coffee table, but it wasn't for the television. It was connected to the high-fidelity sound system in the room. "I am going to play you something, Darius," I said, "and I want you to listen very carefully." He looked confused. "What is it?" "It is a recording," I said, "from the bug I planted in your kitchen 3 weeks ago. Before the kidnapping. Before the tracker. Before everything." I pressed play. The sound was crystal clear. It was the sound of Darius's voice. He wasn't crying in the recording. He wasn't scared. He sounded arrogant. He sounded like a man making a business deal. I recognized the other voice too. It was the raspy voice of the cartel enforcer, the man who had called me on the burner phone. "We need the money, Darius," the enforcer said. "We are tired of waiting." I know, Darius's voice replied, smooth and confident. "The old man is stubborn, but I have a plan. We are going to put a tracker on his truck. We are going to scare him." "And if he doesn't pay?" the enforcer asked. There was a pause on the recording, a silence that stretched for 5 seconds. In the hotel room, Darius went pale. He knew what was coming. He tried to stand up. "Pop, don't sit down," I barked. The recording continued. Darius's voice filled the room. "If he doesn't pay, do whatever you want to the old man. Break his legs, cut off a finger. I don't care. Just get the combination to the safe. He has millions buried in there. Once you get the code, he is disposable. Just make sure it looks like a robbery gone wrong." The recording ended. The silence in the hotel suite was heavier than the grave. Darius sat frozen in the chair. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I looked for the son I had raised. I looked for the little boy who used to sit on my lap and steer the truck. I couldn't find him. I didn't say that, he whispered. That is edited. That is fake." I stood up. I walked over to him. I leaned down until my face was inches from his. "I have 3 independent audio forensic experts who have already certified that recording," I said softly. "It is real, Darius, and it is the reason you are not going to rehab. You are not coming to live with me." "You sold me," I said. "You didn't just sell me out. You gave them permission to torture me. You gave them permission to kill me. Disposable. That is what you called me." Darius started to cry again, but this time it was different. It was the crying of a cornered rat. "I didn't mean it," he screamed. "I was just talking tough. I was trying to buy time." "You bought time with my blood," I roared, slamming my hand on the table. He flinched, cowering back into the chair. I walked to the window. I couldn't look at him anymore. It made me sick. "I don't have a son," I said to the glass reflection. "Pop, please." "I don't have a son." I repeated, my voice steady and final. "I have a liability. I have a bad investment. And I have an enemy who shares my last name." I turned around. "And I treat enemies accordingly." I pressed a button on the intercom. "Send them in, Marcus." The door to the suite opened, but it wasn't room service. It was the district attorney. And behind him, 2 state police detectives. Darius looked at them. He looked at me. The realization dawned on him slowly like a creeping frost. You set me up," he whispered. "I didn't set you up," I said. "I just invited the audience." The detectives walked over to Darius. They weren't gentle this time. They didn't care about his caste. They pulled him out of the chair. "Darius King," the detective said, clicking the cuffs onto his wrists. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit capital murder, kidnapping, and extortion." "Murder," Darius shrieked, struggling against them. "I didn't kill anyone. He is alive. Look at him." "Conspiracy," the district attorney said, stepping forward. "You ordered the hit, Darius. We have the tapes. We have the testimony from the gunman we arrested at the house. They flipped on you. They said you gave the green light. Darius looked at me one last time as they dragged him toward the door. His eyes were wide, filled with a terror that would haunt me for the rest of my life. But I didn't look away. I forced myself to watch. "Pop, help me!" he screamed. "Don't let them take me. I am your boy. My boy died when he crawled under my truck," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Goodbye, Darius." The door closed. The screams were cut off. I was alone in the suite. I sat back down in my chair. My hands were shaking just a little. I poured myself another cup of tea. It was cold. I had done it. I had cut off the limb to save the body. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than the war. Harder than the strikes. Harder than burying my wife. But it was necessary. The phone rang. It was Silas. "Is it done?" he asked. "It is done," I said. "He is in custody. The tape is in evidence. Are you okay, Elijah?" I looked out at the city. The lights were coming on one by one, millions of people living their lives oblivious to the darkness. "I am alive, Silas," I said. "And for now, that has to be enough." The courtroom was a theater of mahogany and lies, and I had the best seat in the house. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecutor's table, my hands resting on the head of a cane. I didn't really need, but which added to the image of the aggrieved elderly father. The room was packed. The press had descended like locusts, hungry for the final chapter of the saga that had captivated Chicago for months. They wanted to see the kingpin fall or the socialite burn. They didn't care which. Tiffany sat at the defense table looking like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together. She wore a modest gray dress, high-necked and long-sleeved, designed to make her look small and vulnerable. She wore no jewelry. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She wasn't playing the power broker today. She was playing the victim. She was playing the battered wife forced into a life of crime by a dangerous husband. Darius sat 10 feet away from her, but it might as well have been 10 miles. He looked hollow. His prison jumpsuit hung off his frame, and his skin had the gray pallor of a man who hadn't seen the sun in weeks. He didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the judge. He just stared at the table, picking at his cuticles. He knew he was the sacrificial lamb. The trial had been going on for 3 days, but today was the main event. Today, Tiffany's lawyer was making his opening arguments for her defense. His name was Sterling. He was the kind of lawyer who cost $1,000 an hour and smiled like he wanted to eat your liver. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling began, his voice smooth as silk. "You have heard the prosecution describe a conspiracy. You have heard them describe a plot to kidnap and murder. But what you haven't heard is the context. You haven't heard the truth about the power dynamics in the King household." He pointed a manicured finger at Darius. "This man," he said, "is a gambling addict. He is a man who owes hundreds of thousands of dollars to violent criminals. He is a man who was desperate. And when a man is desperate, he looks for someone to control. He looked for the weakest person in his orbit. His wife." Tiffany dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. The jury watched her. I saw a few of them soften. It was working. My client, Sterling continued, did not buy a tracker. She did not contact the cartel. She was terrified. She was told that if she didn't cooperate, if she didn't help her husband secure his inheritance, they would both be killed. She acted under duress. She acted out of fear for her life. She is not a criminal mastermind. She is a survivor of domestic terror. I watched Darius. His head snapped up. His eyes widened. He looked at Tiffany. She refused to meet his gaze. She just kept staring at her hands, trembling perfectly on cue. Darius's face turned red. The vein in his neck bulged. He had accepted his guilt. He had accepted that he was going to prison. But he had not accepted this. He had not accepted being painted as the monster to save the woman who had turned him into one. The prosecutor stood up to object, but Darius beat him to it. "She is lying," Darius shouted. He slammed his fist onto the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "She is lying." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. King, you will be silent." "I won't be silent," Darius screamed, standing up, his chair crashing backward. "She did it. It was her idea. She bought the tracker." Sterling turned to the judge, his face a mask of faux concern. "Your Honor, please control the defendant. He is clearly unstable." "Unstable," Darius roared. "I am not unstable. I am awake." He pointed a shaking finger at Tiffany. Check her Amazon account, he yelled, his voice raw with betrayal. Check the purchase history from November 3rd. She bought the GPS tracker. She used her Prime account because she wanted free shipping. The courtroom erupted. Reporters started typing furiously. The jurors leaned forward. And the burner phone. Darius continued the words spilling out of him like blood from a wound. The phone we used to call the cartel. She bought it at the gas station on 5th and Main. Check the security footage. She went in alone because she said I looked too nervous. Tiffany finally looked at him. Her mask slipped. For a second, the vulnerability vanished and the predator resurfaced. Her eyes burned with hate. "Shut up, you idiot!" she hissed loud enough for the front row to hear. I stood in the garage. Darius shouted, ignoring her, ignoring the judge, ignoring his own lawyer who was trying to pull him down. I stood there and watched her put the tracker on the truck. She said, "You were too stupid to notice, Pop." She said, "You were just a senile old man who deserved to die so we could live." The judge was hammering the gavel, shouting for order, but the damage was done. The genie was out of the bottle. Darius wasn't just confessing, he was dragging her down into the pit with him. He was burning the house down to kill the spider. Bailiffs rushed forward and forced Darius back into his seat. He was panting, sweating, his chest heaving. But he was smiling. A wild, broken smile. He had finally stood up to her. It cost him everything, but he had done it. I looked at Sterling. The lawyer stood frozen for a moment. His narrative of the poor, coerced wife had just been shredded by specific, verifiable facts. Amazon receipts, security footage. These were things that could be checked. These were things that left a trail. Sterling looked at the jury. He saw their faces. He saw the doubt. He knew he was losing them. So he did what sharks do when they smell blood in the water. He attacked a new target. He turned slowly and looked at me. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice regaining its composure. "The defendant's outburst is tragic, but it is also convenient. It shifts the blame. But let us look at the root cause here. Let us look at the man who claims to be the victim." He walked toward me. He stopped 5 feet away. He didn't look at the judge anymore. He looked at the gallery. "Mr. Elijah King claims to be a retired logistics manager," Sterling said. "A humble man, a simple man. But we have discovered that Mr. King's past is anything but simple." He picked up a file from his table. "Is it not true," Sterling asked rhetorically, "that during the labor strikes of the 1980s, Mr. King was investigated 3 times for assault? Is it not true that he was known as an enforcer for the union? A man who solved problems with a baseball bat?" "Objection," the prosecutor called out. "Relevance goes to character, Your Honor," Sterling countered smoothly. "The defense argues that the environment of violence and fear in the King family originates with the father. We argue that Darius King learned his methods from Elijah King. We argue that this entire scenario, the kidnapping, the extortion, is a result of the toxic criminal culture Elijah King cultivated." The judge hesitated, then nodded. "I will allow it. But tread carefully, counselor." Sterling smiled. He thought he had found the weak spot. He thought that by painting me as a thug, he could make the jury believe that Darius was just a product of his environment, and Tiffany was an innocent caught in the crossfire. He talked about the old days. He talked about the rumors. He talked about the men who went missing during the transport wars. He tried to turn my survival into a crime. I sat there and listened. I didn't flinch. I didn't get angry. I knew who I was. I knew what I had done to survive. And I knew that nothing I had done in the past justified my son trying to sell me to a cartel in the present. But Sterling was good. He was weaving a story. He was making the jury wonder if maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the innocent victim here. Maybe I was a monster who had created other monsters. And then the prosecutor stood up. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, cutting off Sterling's grandstanding, "the state would like to call a rebuttal witness. A witness who can speak directly to the timeline of the GPS tracker and the intent of the defendants." Sterling frowned. "Who is this witness?" "It is not on the list. He is a surprise witness." "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "he just arrived from out of the country. We just verified his identity this morning." The judge looked over his glasses. "Call him." The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The room went silent. A man walked in. He was huge. He was wearing a plaid flannel shirt tucked into jeans and boots that had seen more miles than most airplanes. He had a beard like a thicket of wire and skin weathered by wind and diesel fumes. He walked down the center aisle with a rolling gait. He looked out of place in the sterile courtroom. He looked like a mountain that had decided to visit a library. He walked past Tiffany. She stared at him confused. She didn't know him. He walked past Darius. Darius looked blank. He walked past me, and as he passed, he winked. A small, almost imperceptible twitch of his eye. It was Frenchie, my old friend from the Montreal run, the man I had mailed the package to. He took the stand. The chair creaked under his weight. He placed a massive hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Jean-Luc Leblanc." The man rumbled his voice deep and thick with a French-Canadian accent. "But my friends call me Frenchie," Mr. Leblanc, the prosecutor said, holding up an evidence bag containing a black plastic box. "Do you recognize this device?" Frenchie looked at the tracker. "Oui," he said. "That is the little bug Elijah sent me. And how did you receive it? In the mail. Priority Express. Elijah called me. He said, 'Frenchie, I have a problem. I have a pest. I need you to take it for a ride.'" The prosecutor smiled. "And what did you do with it?" "Mr. Leblanc, I put it in my rig," Frenchie said, grinning. "I taped it to the roof of my cab. And then I drove. I drove from Windsor to Montreal. I drove fast. And did you know who was tracking it?" Non-Frenchie said. "Elijah didn't say. He just said, 'Someone is watching me, Frenchie. Show them the world.'" The prosecutor turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prosecutor said, "this man drove the tracker across the border. He is the reason the defendants panicked. He is the reason they broke into Elijah King's house. He is the proof that Elijah King wasn't running away. He was setting a trap." Sterling stood up. "Objection. This witness is irrelevant." The prosecutor turned to Sterling. "Irrelevant. Mr. LeBlanc is the only person who knows exactly when the tracker crossed the border, and we have the time-stamped logs from his truck's GPS. He picked up a piece of paper. At 2:14 a.m., the tracker crossed into Canada. At 2:15 a.m., Tiffany Vance called her lawyer to ask about probate law. The courtroom gasped. The timeline was perfect. The connection was undeniable. Tiffany put her head in her hands. Frenchie looked at me from the stand. He nodded. The trap wasn't just closed, it was welded shut, but we weren't done yet. The prosecutor had one more card to play, one more piece of evidence that Frenchie had brought with him from the north, and it was going to bury them. The air in the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. The prosecutor held the small black plastic box in his hand like it was a holy relic. It was the tracker, the device that had started this entire war, the mechanical seed of my son's destruction. He turned it over in his fingers, letting the jury see the serial number etched into the casing. Mr. LeBlanc, the prosecutor, said, his voice calm and methodical. "You testified that you drove this device to Canada, but do you know where it came from?" Frenchie shook his head, his massive beard swaying. "No, sir. Elijah just gave it to me." The prosecutor walked over to the evidence table. He picked up a piece of paper. It was an invoice. "We traced the serial number, ladies and gentlemen. This isn't a generic device you buy at a spy shop with cash. This is a fleet management tracker. High-end, subscription-based, and it is registered to a corporate account." He walked to the defense table and dropped the paper in front of Tiffany. "It is registered to Vance Luxury Properties, specifically to the account of the CEO, Tiffany Vance." Tiffany froze. Her face was a mask of alabaster stillness, but I could see the tremor in her jaw. She had been sloppy. She had been so arrogant, so sure that I was just a senile old man who wouldn't notice a bug on his truck that she had bought the device with her own company credit card, probably for the tax write-off. Greed is a blinder. It makes you focus on the pennies while you lose the dollars. Her lawyer, Sterling, jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is circumstantial. Anyone at her company could have ordered that device." The prosecutor smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who is about to drop the guillotine. "We thought you might say that, Mr. Sterling, which is why we have one more piece of evidence to present. A piece of evidence provided by Mr. LeBlanc." Frenchie leaned forward in the witness box. "I drive a 2022 Peterbilt," he rumbled. "She is a beauty, but she is also a vault. I have cameras on the dash, on the mirrors, on the rear doors. 360-degree coverage. Insurance requires it, but I like it because it helps me remember the scenery." The prosecutor nodded to the bailiff, who dimmed the lights. A large screen descended from the ceiling. "Mr. LeBlanc, "Where were you parked before you left for the border?" the prosecutor asked. "I was at the truck stop off I-90 in Gary, Indiana," Frenchie said. "I was fueling up, waiting for the snow to clear. And did you see anyone familiar while you were there?" "I saw a black Mercedes van," Frenchie said. "And I saw a white BMW." The screen flickered to life. The video was high definition, crisp and clear despite the gray winter light. It showed the gravel lot of a truck stop. Snow was falling softly. In the frame, a white BMW pulled up next to a black Mercedes van. I knew that van. It was the same van that had come to my house. The same van that had taken Darius. The door of the BMW opened. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a white wool coat and sunglasses. She looked out of place among the diesel pumps and the 18-wheelers. She looked like a swan in a pigsty. It was Tiffany. She walked to the van. The side door slid open. A man stepped out. I recognized him immediately. The enforcer. The man with the raspy voice. They didn't shake hands. Tiffany reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She handed it to the man. He opened it. He pulled out a stack of cash. He thumbed through it. He nodded. Then Tiffany said something. The camera didn't pick up the audio from that distance, but her face was clear. She looked angry. She pointed a finger at the man, then made a gesture. She drew her thumb across her throat. The courtroom gasped. It was a collective sound, a sucking in of breath that sucked the oxygen right out of the room. The video ended. The lights came back on. Tiffany was staring at the blank screen. Her mouth was open. Her hands were gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. Sterling was rubbing his temples. He knew it was over. He knew there was no spin that could fix this. The prosecutor turned to the jury. "That video was taken 3 hours before Darius King was kidnapped," he said. "That was the down payment. Tiffany Vance wasn't a victim. She was the architect. She hired the hitmen, she paid them, and she gave the order." He turned to look at Tiffany. She wasn't being coerced. She was conducting business. Tiffany stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "It is a lie," she screamed. Her voice was shrill, shattering the solemnity of the court. "That video is fake. He made it. He has money. He paid someone to make it. Sit down." Mrs. Vance, the judge, barked, banging his gavel. "I won't sit down," she shrieked. Her eyes were wild, darting around the room. She looked at the jury. She looked at the press. She looked at Darius, who was staring at her with a mixture of horror and realization. "You idiot," she yelled at Darius. "This is your fault. If you had just been a man, if you had just taken the money, we wouldn't be here. But you are weak. You are just like him." She pointed at me. Her finger was trembling. Her face was twisted into a rictus of pure hate. The mask of the refined socialite, the grieving daughter-in-law, fell away completely. Underneath was something ugly, something ancient. "Look at him," she screamed, her voice cracking. "He thinks he is better than us. He thinks because he has money he is someone. But he is nothing. He is just a dirty old thug from the ghetto." The racial slur that followed was like a physical blow. It was a word that hadn't been used in polite society for decades, but it rolled off her tongue with the ease of long practice. She didn't just use it once, she screamed it. She poured all her failure, all her greed, all her entitlement into that one hateful word. She called me things that would make a sailor blush. She called Darius a half-breed mongrel. She called the judge corrupt. She called the jury stupid. She was unraveling. She was burning down her own defense. Darius put his head on the table and covered his ears. He was sobbing. He was listening to the woman he loved, the woman he had sold his soul for, describe him as a genetic mistake. Sterling tried to grab her arm. "Tiffany, shut up. Sit down. Don't touch me," she snarled, slapping him away. "You are fired. You are all incompetent. I am Tiffany Vance. My father built this city. I shouldn't be here with these animals." The bailiffs moved in. They didn't wait for the judge's order. They had seen enough. Tiffany fought them. She kicked and scratched. She was no longer human. She was a cornered rat spitting venom. "Let go of me," she screamed as they dragged her backward. "He stole my life. That money was mine. It was mine." I sat in the front row and watched. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, cold pity. She was beautiful on the outside, but inside she was rotten. She was a hollow shell filled with greed and hate, and now the whole world could see it. The jurors were staring at her with open mouths. I saw disgust on their faces. I saw the foreman, a middle-aged woman, shake her head slowly. They weren't looking at a defendant anymore. They were looking at a monster. The judge's face was stone. He waited until the bailiffs had forced Tiffany back into her chair until she was panting and glaring at the table before he spoke. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, his voice quiet and deadly. "In 30 years on the bench, I have never witnessed such a display. You have not only disrespected this court, you have revealed a character so devoid of morality that it chills me to the bone." He looked at the jury. "Please disregard the defendant's outburst," he said, "though I doubt anyone here will ever be able to forget it." Tiffany looked up. Her eyes met mine. For a second I saw a flicker of fear. Real fear. She realized what she had done. She realized she had just handed the prosecutor a conviction wrapped in a bow. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just looked at her. I looked at the woman who had tried to kill me. I looked at the woman who had destroyed my son, and then I turned my back on her. The trial wasn't over officially. There were closing arguments, there were instructions to the jury, but it was over. Frenchie stepped down from the witness stand. He walked past me on his way out. "She has a mouth on her, that one," he whispered. "She does," I said, "but she just used it to dig her own grave." The courtroom settled back into an uneasy silence. The air was still charged with the electricity of her hate. Darius lifted his head. He looked at the empty space where his wife's dignity used to be. He looked at me. He mouthed one word: "Sorry." I looked at him. I saw the bruises fading on his face, but the scars on his soul were fresh and bleeding. It was too late for sorry. Sorry doesn't fix a broken window. Sorry doesn't refill a bank account. And sorry doesn't wash away the word she had just called his father. I turned my attention back to the judge. The hammer was about to fall, and when it did, it was going to crush them both. The jury took 4 hours to decide the fate of my family. 4 hours. That is not a long time in the grand scheme of things. It is the time it takes to drive from Chicago to St. Louis if you have a heavy foot. It is the time it takes to watch a double feature. It is a terrifyingly short amount of time to erase 30 years of fatherhood and turn a son into a convict. I sat in the front row, my hands resting on my cane, my eyes fixed on the seal of the state of Illinois hanging above the judge's bench. The courtroom was silent, but it was a loud silence. It was the sound of 50 people holding their breath. It was the sound of pens scratching on notepads as reporters prepared their headlines. When the jury foreman stood up, he didn't look at the defense table. That is always the tell. If they look at you, they are letting you go. If they look at the judge, they are burying you. He looked at the judge. "We find the defendant, Tiffany Vance, guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, money laundering, filing a false police report." Tiffany let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound of a balloon deflating. She slumped forward, her forehead hitting the mahogany table with a dull thud. Her high-priced lawyer Sterling didn't even reach out to comfort her. He was already packing his briefcase, calculating his losses. The foreman continued. "We find the defendant Darius King guilty on all counts." Darius didn't move. He didn't blink. He just sat there staring at the empty space in front of him. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. He looked like a house after a fire, standing only because gravity hadn't noticed it was dead yet. The judge thanked the jury. He dismissed them. Then he turned his attention to the sentencing. He didn't wait. He didn't ask for a recess. He had heard enough. He had seen the videos. He had heard the tapes. He had looked into the soul of my family and found it wanting. Tiffany Vance, the judge, said, his voice booming from the bench, "You are a predator. You preyed on the weakness of your husband and the perceived vulnerability of an elderly man. You manipulated the legal system. You weaponized the police. And when caught, you resorted to vile racism in an attempt to save yourself." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I sentence you to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. No possibility of parole for at least 12. 15 years. Tiffany stood up. She looked back at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wild. She opened her mouth to speak, to curse me one last time, to spew more venom. But the bailiff was already there. He took her arm. She jerked away, but there was no fight left in her. She was a queen without a castle, a general without an army. Then the judge looked at Darius. "Darius King, your crime is perhaps more tragic but no less severe. You betrayed the man who gave you life. You sold your father for a gambling debt. You allowed your wife to steer you into darkness, but you were the one who held the wheel." Darius looked up. He looked at the judge with the eyes of a child waiting for a scolding. 10 years, the judge said. Federal custody. The gavel came down. The sound was final. It echoed in the room like a coffin lid slamming shut. The courtroom erupted into noise, reporters shouting questions, the shuffling of feet, the clicking of handcuffs. I watched as the bailiffs moved in on my son. They pulled his arms behind his back. I heard the ratchet of the steel cuffs. It is a sound you never forget. It is the sound of freedom ending. They began to lead him away toward the side door, the door that leads to the holding cells and then to the transport vans and then to a cage. At the door, Darius stopped. He planted his feet. The bailiff gave him a shove, but Darius resisted just for a second. He turned his head. He looked over his shoulder. He looked past the reporters, past the sketch artists, past the curious onlookers. He looked right at me. His eyes were empty. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. There was just a vast, gray nothingness. He looked at me, and I saw the realization hit him. He wasn't looking at his father anymore. He was looking at the man who had put him there. He opened his mouth as if to say something. Maybe goodbye. Maybe I am sorry. Maybe I hate you. But he said nothing. He just looked. And I looked back. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I didn't cry. I sat there in my Italian suit with my millions in the bank, and I let him see me. I let him see the man he had underestimated. I let him see the strength he had mistaken for weakness. I did not offer forgiveness. Forgiveness is for mistakes. This was not a mistake. This was a choice. He had chosen his path, and now he had to walk it. The bailiff shoved him again. Darius stumbled. He turned away, breaking the connection. The door opened, and he stepped through into the darkness. The door closed. My son was gone. I sat there for another minute. The courtroom emptied out around me. The air felt cleaner now that they were gone. Marcus, my head of security, touched my shoulder gently. Mr. King, the car is ready. The press is waiting outside. Do you want the back exit? I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up my cane. No, Marcus, I said. We go out the front. I walked down the aisle. I walked past the empty defense table where Tiffany had sat. I walked past the witness stand where Frenchie had saved my life with a logbook. I walked through the double doors and into the lobby. The moment I stepped out onto the courthouse steps, the world exploded in light. Dozens of cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust in my face. Reporters shouted over each other a cacophony of questions. Mr. King, how do you feel about the verdict? Mr. King, did you really have millions hidden away? Mr. King, do you have anything to say to your son? I stopped on the top step. I looked out at the sea of faces. I looked at the city of Chicago spread out before me, gray and cold and hard. I raised my hand. The crowd went silent. They wanted a soundbite. They wanted a tearful confession from a grieving father. They wanted to see the cracks in the armor. I leaned toward the nearest microphone. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a man who had started with nothing and built an empire. It was the voice of a man who had just won a war. You ask me how I feel, I said. I looked directly into the camera lens, addressing everyone who was watching at home, everyone who thought they could take advantage of the old, or the quiet, or the kind. I feel awake, I said. I paused, letting the wind whip my coat around my legs. For a long time I was asleep. I continued. I let myself believe that blood was thicker than water. I let myself believe that if I was gentle, the world would be gentle back. I drove an old truck. I lived a quiet life. I tried to be a ghost. I looked at the reporters. But my son and his wife, they made a mistake. They thought the ghost was weak. They thought the sleeping lion was a rug. I leaned closer to the mic, my voice dropping to a growl. Don't ever wake a man who just wants to sleep, I said. I stepped back. The reporters started shouting again, but I was done. I had said what needed to be said. Marcus cleared a path through the crowd. I walked down the steps, my head high. At the bottom of the stairs near the curb sat my old truck, the 1998 Ford F-150. It was rusted, it was dented, it had a cracked taillight. It was the vehicle I had driven for 20 years. It was the vehicle Darius had crawled under. It was the symbol of the lie I had lived, the camouflage I had worn to protect my family from the rot of money. It looked small now. It looked tired. A police officer was standing next to it holding the keys. He saw me approaching and held them out. Mr. King, he said respectfully. Your truck, sir? We cleared it from evidence. I looked at the keys. The silver was worn down to brass. I looked at the truck. I thought about the miles we had driven. I thought about the days I had picked Darius up from school in that passenger seat. I shook my head. "Keep it," I said to the officer. "Sir, I don't need it anymore," I said. "Donate it. Crush it. I don't care." I turned away from the truck. I turned away from the past. Pulled up to the curb, gleaming under the streetlights, was a monster of a different kind. A Rolls-Royce Phantom. Black on black. The paint was so deep it looked like you could fall into it. The chrome grille shone like the teeth of a shark. It was a car that cost $500,000. It was a car that screamed power. Marcus opened the rear suicide door. The interior was cream leather and lamb's wool carpets. It smelled of success. It smelled of the truth. I handed my cane to Marcus. I didn't need it. I stood straight. I looked back one last time at the courthouse. Somewhere deep in the bowels of that building, my son was sitting in a cell wearing chains. He was thinking about the money he almost had. He was thinking about the father he had lost. I got into the car. The door closed with a solid, heavy thunk, shutting out the noise of the city, shutting out the cold, shutting out the questions. "Home. Marcus," I said. The engine purred, a sound of limitless power held in reserve. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding over the pavement. I watched the old truck disappear in the rearview mirror, shrinking until it was just a speck of rust in a world of steel. I wasn't Elijah the retiree anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was the king. And the king had returned to his throne. 1 year is a long time in the life of a city like Chicago. Seasons change. The snow turns to gray slush and then melts into the potholes of spring, and eventually the humidity of summer rises off the asphalt like a fever. But 1 year is nothing in the life of a man who has lived through war and labor strikes and the death of a wife. 1 year is just a breath, a pause between heartbeats. I stood at the podium in the gymnasium of the Southside Community Center. The air smelled of floor wax and young ambition. Behind me hung a banner hand-painted by children that read, "The Mary King Scholarship Fund." In the front row sat 20 young men and women. They were black and brown. They were hungry, and they were smart. They were the kind of kids who knew the value of $1 because they had never had enough of them. They were the kind of kids Darius used to be before the world and his own weakness twisted him. I adjusted the microphone. I looked at their faces. I saw hope. I saw the future. My wife, Mary, believed in 2 things I told them, my voice echoing in the quiet gym. She believed in hard work, and she believed in second chances. She didn't care where you came from. She cared where you were going. This money is not a gift. It is an investment. I expect a return, and that return is your success. I handed out the checks. Full rides to state universities. Books, housing, tuition paid in full. It cost me a fraction of what I had made in the last quarter, but the value was infinite. I shook their hands. I looked them in the eye. I saw gratitude. Real gratitude, not the fake obsequious thank yous I had gotten from Tiffany and her ilk. This was my legacy now, not a dynasty of blood, but a dynasty of opportunity. After the ceremony, I got into the back of the Rolls-Royce. Marcus was driving. He didn't ask where we were going. He knew. It was the 3rd Tuesday of the month, the only day I allowed myself to look back. We drove out of the city, past the suburbs, past the strip malls, and into the flat gray expanse of the Illinois countryside. We drove until the fences got high and the wire got barbed. The Federal Correctional Institution. I hated this place. I hated the smell of it, a mixture of industrial cleaner and human misery. I hated the sound of the heavy steel doors slamming shut, a sound that vibrated in your teeth. I went through security. I didn't get special treatment here. I emptied my pockets. I took off my belt. I walked through the metal detector. They led me to the visitation room. It was a long room divided by a thick pane of plexiglass. On one side were the free, on the other were the damned. Darius was brought in. He looked different. The soft edges were gone. The expensive haircut had been shaved down to the scalp. He had lost 30 pounds. His prison uniform was pressed, but it hung on him. He walked with a new wariness, a shuffle that said he had learned to keep his head down and his back against the wall. He had a scar running through his eyebrow, a souvenir from a yard fight or a debt collection inside the walls. He sat down. He picked up the phone. I picked up mine. "Hello, Pop," he said. His voice was flat. The arrogance was gone. The desperation was gone. There was just resignation. "Hello, Darius," I said. "How are you?" he asked, like we were discussing the weather. "I am busy," I said. "Business is good." He nodded. He looked at my suit. He looked at my hands. "I saw you on the news," he said. "The scholarship fund." Mom would have liked that. She would have, I agreed. We sat in silence for a moment. The air between us was filled with the ghosts of the past. The ghost of the boy he was. The ghost of the father I tried to be. "I heard about Tiffany," he said. 15 years, I said. "She is in a medium security facility in Florida. Her appeals were denied." Darius laughed a dry, humorless sound. "She sends me letters, you know. She blames me. She says I ruined her life. She wants me to send her money for the commissary." "And do you?" I asked. "I don't have any money, Pop," he said, looking me in the eye. "You saw to that." I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a small blue book. It was a savings passbook from a credit union, one of the few that still used paper. I pressed it against the glass. Darius leaned forward, squinting to read the balance. $20,000. He looked at me confused. "What is this?" I spoke clearly into the phone. "That is your wages, Darius." "Wages?" he asked. "If you had been a good man," I said, "if you had been honest, you might have gotten a job. You might have worked as a waiter or a driver or a clerk. You would have worked hard. You would have saved. And in a year, maybe you would have saved $20,000. I paused. "That is the money you earned by suffering. That is the money I would have paid a stranger to do the job you are doing now, which is sitting in a cage learning how to be a human being. I am leaving this with the warden," I said. "It will be waiting for you when you get out in 9 years. Darius stared at the book. His hands trembled against the glass. $20,000, he whispered. "Pop, that won't even buy a car. That won't buy a house." "No," I said. "It won't. It will buy you a start. It will buy you a cheap apartment and a suit for a job interview. It will buy you a bus ticket." I leaned closer to the glass, my eyes locking onto his. "And that is all you are ever going to get from me, Darius. Not a penny more. Not a job. Not a reference. Not a place to sleep. When you walk out of here, you are going to take that money and you are going to go somewhere else. I don't care where. New York, Los Angeles, London. But you are not staying in Chicago." "Chicago is mine," I said. Darius lowered his head. He understood. He wasn't being disowned. He was being exiled. He was being banished from the kingdom he had tried to steal. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly, tears dripping onto the counter. "Why give me anything at all?" "Because I am your father," I said. "And because I want you to know that you could have had it all, if you had just asked instead of taken, if you had just loved me instead of calculating my worth. This 20,000 represents the life you could have built if you were humble. Take it, use it, and never say my name again." I hung up the phone. Darius watched me. He put his hand on the glass. "Pop, wait." I didn't wait. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I turned around and walked toward the heavy steel door. I heard him tapping on the glass, a faint, desperate rhythm, but I didn't turn back. I walked out of the prison into the bright sunlight of the afternoon. Marcus opened the car door. I slid inside. The air conditioning was cold and clean. "To the marina, Marcus," I said. We drove back to the city. I watched the cornfields turn into suburbs and the suburbs turn into skyscrapers. I felt a profound sense of finality. The book was closed. The debt was paid. We pulled up to the private dock at Burnham Harbor. The water of Lake Michigan was a deep, sparkling blue. And there, sitting in the slip, was my new office. The Mary Kay, a 60-foot Sunseeker yacht, sleek, white, and powerful. I walked down the dock. My crew was waiting. They cast off the lines as soon as I stepped aboard. We motored out past the breakwall, leaving the noise of the city behind. I went up to the flybridge and sat in the captain's chair. I poured myself a glass of aged rum. I looked back at the skyline of Chicago, the city of broad shoulders, the city that I had conquered from the shadows. My phone rang. It wasn't a burner phone. It wasn't Darius. It was my encrypted satellite line. I picked it up. "Mr. King," a voice said. "This is Mr. Saito from Tokyo. We have reviewed your proposal regarding the new shipping lanes through the Great Lakes. We are very interested, but we hear rumors. We hear you are retired." I took a sip of rum. The wind ruffled my white hair. I looked at the horizon where the water met the sky. I laughed a low rumble that came from the chest. "Mr. Saito," I said, leaning back, "I am not retired. I was just taking a nap. But I am awake now. And King Logistics is open for business. I negotiated the deal right there on the water. $50 million in freight contracts, new ships, new routes, a new empire rising from the ashes of the old one. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I hung up the phone. I was 74 years old. I had no wife. I had no son. But I had peace. I had power. And I had the open water. I revved the engines, feeling the vibration of the yacht beneath me like a living thing. I turned the wheel, heading north toward the open lake, toward the future. The lion wasn't sleeping anymore. The lion was hunting. And the jungle had never looked so beautiful. The silence in my house is different now. For years it was the silence of waiting. Waiting for the phone to ring. Waiting for my son to ask for money. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now it is the silence of a fortress. It is the quiet of a vault that has been locked from the inside. I sit on my porch in the evening watching the sun go down over the Chicago skyline. I drink my coffee black. I think about Darius. I do not think about him with anger anymore. Anger is a fire that burns itself out. I think about him with a cold, clinical clarity. I spent 40 years building a logistics empire, moving cargo across oceans and borders, solving problems that would break lesser men. I knew how to build a business. I knew how to build a reputation. But I failed to build a man. I look at my hands. These hands have steered ships and signed contracts worth millions, but they also held a baby boy. They taught him to catch a baseball. They wiped his tears. And somewhere along the line, I made a fatal calculation. I thought that by hiding my strength, I could teach him to be strong. I thought that by living simply, I could teach him humility. I was wrong. You cannot teach a man to hunt by feeding him from your plate, and you cannot teach a man honor by shielding him from the consequences of his own greed. By hiding my wealth, I didn't protect him from entitlement. I just made him hungry for things he didn't understand. I made him a scavenger instead of a hunter. People ask me how I could do it, how I could send my own flesh and blood to prison. They look at me with fear in their eyes. They see the ruthless businessman. They see the monster who destroyed his own family. They do not understand. I didn't destroy my family. My family destroyed itself. I just refused to be the wreckage they stood on. There is a cruelty in survival. It is a lesson nature teaches us, but civilization tries to make us forget. A wolf will chew off its own leg to escape a trap. I had to chew off my own heart to save my soul. If I had let Darius go, if I had paid his debts, if I had let him slide, he would have done it again. He would have sold me for a cheaper price next time. He would have waited for me to close my eyes, and then he would have put a pillow over my face. I saved his life by putting him in a cage, and I saved mine by throwing away the key. I walked out to the garage today. The Rolls-Royce Phantom was parked there, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a machine of pure luxury and power. It is a beautiful car. It turns heads. It opens doors. But I walked past it. In the corner, sitting on a fresh tarp, was the 1998 Ford F-150. I had bought it back from the impound lot. I had paid a mechanic to fix the rust, to tune the engine, to replace the suspension. I had washed it myself, scrubbing away the dirt of the betrayal. It is just a truck. It smells of old vinyl and gasoline. The heater takes 10 minutes to warm up. The radio only gets AM stations. But it is honest. I opened the door and climbed in. The seat molded to my back like an old friend. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a rough, unrefined sound that was music to my ears. I backed out of the driveway. I didn't look at the empty spot where the BMW used to park. I didn't look at the for sale sign on the neighbor's lawn. I drove out onto the highway. I merged into traffic, a steel fish in a river of plastic cars. I drove fast. I let the wind whip through the open window. I felt the vibration of the road in the steering wheel. I checked the rearview mirror. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking for a tail. I wasn't looking for a black van or a white BMW. I looked at the undercarriage in my mind's eye. There was no black box. There was no blinking red light. There was no signal beaming my location to a predator, because the predators were gone. The wolves were in cages, and the snake had been crushed. I was driving a beat-up truck worth less than $2,000, but I was the richest man on the road, because I owned myself. I owned my direction. I owned my peace. I pressed the gas pedal. The truck surged forward. I am Elijah King. I am 74 years old, and I am just getting started. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by loyalty and respect. We often blind ourselves to the toxicity of our own kin, believing that shared DNA excuses betrayal. But a snake will bite you whether it's a stranger or hatched in your own backyard. My son mistook my silence for weakness and my frugality for poverty. He learned too late that the most dangerous man in the room is often the quietest one. Protect your peace, guard your legacy, and never be afraid to cut off a limb to save the body, even if that limb is your own child. If you enjoyed this story and believe that justice is best served cold, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you would have forgiven Darius or if you would have done exactly what I did. I read every single comment. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your engine running.